call this meeting of the Tacoma Park City Council to order. Will the clerk please call the roll?
Mayor Williams.
I'm here.
Councilmember Daniels Cohen.
Here.
Councilmember Grimes.
Here.
Councilmember Mail.
Here.
Councilmember Schultz.
Here.
Councilmember Seaver.
Present.
Councilmember Seaver.
Here.
There are no additional agenda items this evening, and I gave the agenda scheduling update on Monday, so I'm going to skip that. We'll go to public comment period. Anybody wants to make public comment? Okay, no? Council comments. Councilmember Daniels Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor Williams. This is going to be quick council comments, hot off the press. Bread and Chocolate of Alexandria, doing business as Tacoma Bistro, had their soft opening today, and soft will continue through Sunday. On Monday, October, hello Kay, Monday, April 23rd, they'll have a full menu. I paddled by yesterday and the place looks great. They had all hands on deck, preparing it to look really spiff. They're in the old Everyday Gourmet location, and all I got to say is yum. It's worth stopping by for. Because I used to go to the one in Alexandria, and it's really good. And I'm underlining Seth's really great announcements for Monday night. The city's Arbor Day celebration will be on the grounds of the library on Saturday, April 21st from 10 to 2 p.m., where seedlings will be given away and you can have some of your tree questions answered. I believe the arborist is going to be there. Thank you, Daryl. I wasn't sure. She's saying yes, and that would be a good thing. It's really special because you can watch any tree that you get, you can watch it grow with your family and your kids. So go get a seedling. I get one every year and find some place to plant one and take care of it. So I've got some pretty big ones now. On Saturday night of April the 21st, I can plan your whole social calendar here at Tacoma Park if you let me. Help support a great local news coverage with Tacoma Voice, a party and fundraiser celebrating 25 years of service to Tacoma Park. Will be held at Capital Cheesecake, which I just call the Cheesecake, beginning at 7:30 p.m. So that should be a really fun place. On Sunday, April 22nd, Tacoma Park's very own unsinkable Pat Rumbaugh, the Play Lady, is having a Jim Calder-created bench dedication at Belle Ziegler Park, which is located on Tacoma Avenue, including the Tacoma Park Community Band for musical accompaniment. The dedication begins at 1 p.m., and I think it will happen, rain or shine. Pat Rumbaugh doesn't ever let it rain on her parade, ever, ever. And I'm saving the best for last. I will be at the Co-op on Sunday. That would be April the 22nd, from 11 until 12 noon, to chat with any of you who wish to speak to me about budget and any other Tacoma Park-related topics that you want to discuss. I also don't let it rain on my parade, so I'll be there, rain or shine. And I invite any of my colleagues on the council to be there with me. So rain or shine, I'll be at the Co-op 11 to 12, and then I'll scoot over to the dedication of the bench at Belle Ziegler Park. Thank you.
Okay, Councilmember Schultz.
I just wanted to bring attention to residents that the Zoning Board is preparing to have a public hearing in the next few weeks, I think May 3rd, on a zoning text amendment that on accessory apartments. The accessory apartments are those that are defined as apartments within a single-family dwelling unit, a separate living unit within a single-family dwelling unit, and it could be also a detached, which would be a separate building. That's not new, but what has happened is that a set of what appear to be fairly severe changes in the rules governing house when and house accessory apartments could be built or added to a house in R30 and R60 and R90 zones in Montgomery County. There's been some fairly drastic changes there. that could have a significant impact on our community. I have not seen the text of this text amendment. I first got wind of it last night when several of us here on the City Council were attending the chapter meeting of the Maryland Municipal League, and somebody there brought information about it. I think it's something that we will need to be very concerned about because it could have a dramatic effect on allowing people to have very liberal opportunities to add accessory apartments without having to go through public hearings. Currently, public hearings are required because they're considered to be an exceptional, require a special exception. Under the new text, they would just be considered a limited use. And there's a lot of other parameters that are liberalized, which I'm not going to go into at this point in time. And the truth of the matter is, I can honestly say I'm not entirely sure of what I'm talking about, which is something I've never said before. This is just to alert folks to this, and that it's something I think many municipalities in Montgomery County are going to be taking an anxious look at over the next few weeks to figure out what its significance is and what their reaction needs to be. That's all I wanted to say tonight.
And I'll just follow up on that real quickly. I had promised last night at the meeting that I would follow up and get some more information on that, and I've just gotten that information from Sarah Daines of our staff, and there is a good bit of additional information, and I'm going to call Rose Krasnow at Park and Planning tomorrow and find out some more, and then I will get a copy of this to everybody.
Good. Thank you.
Can you say the date again, please?
I think the public hearing has been scheduled for, let me check my notes here. I don't have,
Whatever is a week later than April 26th.
I think it's May 3rd.
That would
Memory serves me
It would
right.
be, if it's still that date, it will be that Thursday.
That Thursday, that would be May 3rd.
This is the planning board.
And it's up and...
We'll get you more information.
Okay.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. First, I'd like to let people know that there's going to be a cleanup of the valley that runs from the Ed Wilhelm Field on up to Lee Jordan Field. It's going to be on Saturday at 9 o'clock, and I invite everybody to come out for an hour or so and help pull out some of the weeds and take some of the trash out of the valley, and also maybe have a little snack for breakfast. And then, as we're moving now strongly into the budget, I'd like to add one item to the reconciliation, and that is just kind of an approximation of what it would take to put a floor in the atrium area between the police level and the community level, so the community level would have a more usable space, and it would also assist the police department in cutting down on noise to that level. And we can get into more detail on the reasoning and all that, but appreciate getting an approximation.
Anybody else with council comments? Okay, we will move to city manager's comments.
No comments this evening.
All right, then we will move to our first budget work session item, the speed camera fund.
Actually, I'll kind of kick us off.
Okay.
In addition to the Director of Finance and myself, we're joined this evening by our Director of Public Works, Dale Braithwaite, Chief Pucci, the program staff for the Safe Speed program, Sergeant Skibicki and Angelina Canatella, and Sergeant Gilbert is also here this evening. I think as some of the council is aware, Sergeant Skibicki will be retiring at the end of this month, and he'll probably hurt me for doing this, but today is his 25th year anniversary with the city. And if we have when he leaves us for greener pastures at the end of this month, Sergeant Gilbert will be taking his place in the Safe Speed program. I'll just kind of kick it off. There were two specific issues that, before we get into the mechanics of the Speed Camera Fund budget, that I wanted to have Chief Rakucci come up and address. One has to do, as I mentioned, in the special consideration section of the cover sheet, that there has been some discussion and questioning of the right to assess late fees. This came out of a determination of the Chief Judge of the District Court, and I'd like Chief Rakucci to come up and address that issue and share some additional information with the council. I also asked the Chief, while he was at the podium, if he could talk a little bit about the crossing guard post that has been added at Tacoma Junction. As I mentioned in the same section of the cover sheet, I think just in our brief time that we've been trying to cross folks at that intersection, Chief Rakucci feels that we may need a second guard, which is not something that would be reflected in the proposed budget. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the Chief.
Earlier this month, the Chief Judge for the District Court of Maryland issued an opinion in the form of a letter to the departments that are using, obviously, the speed cameras in the state of Maryland. He said that we were no longer...
Is it also for red light cameras?
Yeah.
Okay.
His letter was that we were no longer to use late fees, which we've been doing since the beginning of the program. At that time, we asked him if he could put a hold on it until we talked to the legislature, try to get a bill through. As you all know, they had some problems getting bills through, so we're not going to get a bill through this year for collection fees. So that's out, and don't expect to see it in the special session either. I did some research on it to try to find out what brought this on, since obviously we've been doing this for several years and it hasn't been a problem. Well, you have to remember, when the program started, it started here in Montgomery County, and then the municipalities followed, and they've been doing fees since the day when the program started, and it hasn't been a problem. What we learned when we started researching this last week, as you all know, and as I've used as an example, the state came on board about almost a year and a half, 2 years ago, and are now on all the interstates and work zones, and they use the speed cameras. Unbeknownst to us, they weren't collecting late fees, which wouldn't be told to us because we have no reason to know that. But apparently, at the time that they came on board, they asked for an opinion from the district court chief judge, and he told them they couldn't collect late fees, so they haven't been. But nobody at that time made any issue of it about the fact that it was being done down here and in other places throughout the state. Well, Charles County came on board. They got cameras, and they went to the chief judge, and their argument was, well, they're doing it in Montgomery County, and all the municipalities are down there also, so why can't we? At that point, he realized that his opinion had only went to the Maryland State Police and throughout the rest of the state, and we're not alone. The ones that have come on board have been doing late fees. So he issued this opinion saying we can no longer do that. And at that point, we made a decision about 3 weeks ago that we would stop collecting late fees, which all the municipalities, everybody else in Maryland has done. Now, obviously, we hoped that the state would go back to the late fees. They didn't. It is a part of our thing. We're still looking at the numbers. It obviously would reduce it. It's not a major reduction. So we're out of the late fee business. We've been working with our partners on how we go about collection. We will still flag the car if they don't, in a 30-day period, pay their fine. If they don't pay their fine after the car gets flagged, then it goes to the credit bureau. And to be honest with you, if there's one thing that seems to get people's attention is when we go to the credit bureau. Even the late fees doesn't bother them as much as the credit bureau. So that's the way we'll go about collecting them. We will collect the $40, and that will be what we do. Hopefully, in the near future, we'll be able to get legislation. We are still talking among the municipalities. Several of the attorneys are talking. We haven't brought ours in yet because they haven't really got down to any substantial issues of what they may think we could do. At this point, we believe legislation would be the best resort because we don't believe at this point we can overturn what the district court judge. And you have to realize in the end, the district court is the final say in any tickets, like if they go to court. So they do have a right to set the rules, and we believe they're within the law as it is now. Collection fees was not addressed up till now by the judge. He's addressed it, so we're going to follow through on it. It's an ongoing issue. We're spending a lot of time on it right now. We're redoing all the tickets so that it will explain to the public what they have to do. So I'll take questions on that at this point before I move on to the next issue.
My understanding, because I've heard discussions of this both at the Municipal League Legislative Committee and then last night at the chapter meeting, is that the reason the chief judge said that we couldn't collect those is that it was a constitutional issue that that there were different levels of them. Not that you couldn't do them and that he had told the state you couldn't do them, but that it was just you can't have different ones. It sounded like the district court only wanted to enforce one level of them. Is that consistent with what you were saying?
His letter said we did not have the authority to do collection fees. I've seen the letter.
Mhm.
Have I missed anything on that? No, it just said we couldn't do the letter. He didn't go into a lot of detail. He just said you'll need legislation if you want to
Right,
change the
right,
law.
right.
And
From all of the pieces that I've heard, it sounds like there's a lot of different interpretations of.
you are correct.
Of what he said in that letter, what the letter, how the letter, what force in law the letter has, and the reasons for it all. Everybody has different opinions.
But here's the bottom line, Mayor. The state has not done it since the beginning. That was my ace in the, somewhat of my ace in the hole, that if the state was doing it, and with the amount of money we need here to operate this state, that they would, it was unbeknownst to me till I researched it last Friday, that they were not collecting it and set the tone. All the municipalities agree that we have to obey this letter. We've looked it over. We need to be consistent here in Montgomery County as a municipality on how we do it, and we're going to be that. We'll obviously work during the year, and obviously we'll look for you to work with the legislature, with MML, to try to get this changed. If not, it's fine. We're still collecting fees, and remember, the true purpose of this program is to reduce accidents, and we are continuing to do that. The cameras are still up, and unfortunately, they're still running through them, and we'll still collect money. It just reduces its, I don't know how much you would say, based on what you and me looked at.
We're still looking at it. I think it could potentially be as high as, $100,000. The one thing I would just note for the benefit of the council is that we were very conservative, I think, in how we estimated revenues, possibly coming from the Carroll Avenue cameras. So I think Yvonne and I want to talk about it a little bit more and see if there's even a need at this point to adjust revenues. But that's something I think we'll look at and have a recommendation for the council when we get to reconciliation in about 10 days.
So my sense is that under a best-case scenario, the possibility for collecting late fees on those tickets won't come back around until at least October of 2013.
Correct.
Okay. Any other questions? Thanks.
The second issue. As you know, we started a new crossing guard 2 weeks ago. I've heard from a lot of people. I've had some input from Councilman Mayle about what's going on there. We've been observing it. If you go back to our initial discussions with the citizens, how dangerous it was and how the lights work and everything else. We quickly determined that we had to do it in a certain way, which we knew would make everyone happy. We also looked at it from the standpoint of safety for the kids and for my crossing guard, and we've determined that we need 2 people there. And I made a decision earlier this week. It's going to be manned by 2 people to the end of the school year. We'll obviously request a position.
I can't read the chief's lips, but I think what he and I had talked earlier this week. What I had indicated to him is I have, within the budgetary authority that's been given to me, I think the ability to tell them they can make a temporary hire for the next 6 weeks. We do have some salary savings because we've had a guard who's been out on workers' comp injury leave, but that any kind of permanent assignment would be subject to the council authorizing a second position in the FY13 budget for that post.
So we've made an offer today, and I'll have a new guard on board in 2 weeks, who's an experienced guard who left the city many years ago, but still has the experience and will train her. But we'll have 2 guards at that location. Until then, there'll be a police officer working that location with our guard to ensure the safety of the kids and of our residents. When we started this, we knew we'd have to look at it because I don't think I need to tell anybody in the room it's a unique intersection that has all kinds of challenges with the lights and everything else that's down there. And we put our most experienced guard, and she's had a challenge, but she's pretty good at running the show. But she needs help, and that's why I made the decision earlier this week to put 2 down there. And then we'll have a second guard up there a week from Monday.
We've had some descriptions of her ability to run the show. Councilmember Grimes?
Thank you. The need for a second guard is not at all a surprise. I know that I've passed through that intersection at times when parents have been crossing, prior to the guards coming on, parents have been crossing with their kids on the way to school, and I've seen them walking outside the crosswalks, directly across, scurrying across. As we know, there have been issues about the timing of the lights. So Council Members Mail, Daniels-Cohen, and I introduced last week a resolution that I hope will be considered soon to put in a direct crossing from Grant Avenue to the city lot that should shorten the path across, and that would have to be done by the State Highway Administration, I believe. That is something that had been advocated by the Tacoma Junction Task Force and also the parents who had come in here to the council chambers to ask for the crossing guard at Tacoma Junction. I have two questions. What is the full year cost of a second crossing guard for that intersection? I assume it's the same as any other. And a full school year, I mean. And then secondly, in your estimation, with a optimization of the signal timings in order and the installation of a second direct crosswalk, would that eliminate potentially the need for a second crossing guard? If you have an opinion you want to venture.
Yeah, I'll give you a minute. Crossing guards, what, was it 12,000?
I apologize, I'm trying to go off memory. I think it depends on the level of benefit that is
4 hours.
elected.
It's a 4-hour guard.
I apologize, Councilmember Grimes. I'll look that number up on the personnel projections and get that figure out to you all.
So it's possibly 12,000, possibly something more or less.
I think it was 12,000 in the last one, Ms. Matthews, when we put it at.
The ballpark is really good enough.
Yeah.
I wouldn't want to hazard a guess because I kind of knew this might happen. I was hoping that it wouldn't, but you may still need two people because we'd have two crosswalks. We may need two guards there. It's a tough intersection to work. We'd have to look at it. Obviously, if the intersection got fixed the way I think everyone would like it, it may be able to do it with one guard, but at this point, we need two guards. I don't want to back off of it. I would tell you, you'd have to get everything fixed, and I tell you, you'd be here next year probably before you could discuss getting rid of a second guard.
I suppose you could even need a third if you have three crossings there, but anyway.
Now, two should do it.
would
It's not Piney Branch Road, but it comes close. I mean, we have two guards on Piney Branch Road, as you well know, because of the danger of that road. But we need two there right now, and I mean, I don't like taking officers off the street, but I made a commitment if we couldn't get come up with something ingenious as the city manager did for me so we could go ahead and hire somebody right away. And we just lucked out the next person on the list has crossing guard experience, which helps us immensely. So I think for the safety of the kids and the parents and everyone else in the city, I think we're going to be doing it for at least the next year because unless you know something I don't know about the state, getting something done within the next year would be a miracle.
Thank you.
Councilmember Snipper.
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, thank you for this update. I really appreciate it. And I'm glad to hear that the reduction in speed camera will not be significant. Could you, on the crossing guard issue, could you describe in a little more detail exactly where the guard and now police officer are going to be for a while? I don't quite see how give us how it all work.
The problem right now is with the way the light works, we get them to the middle, and this was discussed earlier.
Right.
We get them to the middle, and then she's got people at the other side. So she has to stop all the traffic, keep the kids there, and what she's been doing is going against the traffic. She keeps them moving until she's got the kids across, which is her right. Now, I will tell you, we've had a few complaints from a few unhappy drivers, and I'm not going to worry about that. My concern is with you wouldn't believe the complaints we got when we put the second one out there. It's the first time I've heard a person complain about an officer at a crossing and the fact that we should use the officer somewhere else. But we got several letters from drivers who didn't like the fact they had to sit a couple minutes. The way we're doing it now is with two guards, one can start them across, the other one can stay in the middle, and that way we've got both ends covered for kids on both sides, and we can keep the traffic stopped. So that's what we're doing right now. Right now, you got one person doing it. She's pretty good at it because she's rather loud and boisterous, and she can really move fast and keep the traffic going. But for safety reasons, and she came to us, she says, I need help. And we knew that, we were evaluating it, and we've given her help.
Okay, thank you.
Councilmember Mayo?
Thank you, Mayor. Chief, I wonder what your opinion is of the safety, obviously, waiting for the state to do it, but putting a crosswalk between the city lot parking area and Grant Avenue, if that would, it's a much bigger, it's a 4-lane stretch of road, but it's a single stretch.
It's a bigger stretch, which makes it more dangerous. I think if we got the lights functioning the way I think they should and looked at it's a rework of the whole intersection. What you don't want to do is put a Band-Aid to solve it. I think the Junction report had a lot of good suggestions, which I think we need to have a long-term plan, and let's not put a Band-Aid there because that's not going to solve it in the long run. I would like to see how they're going to redo the whole junction and get the lights synchronized right. That way, it would be a good, safer crossing. If we put another Band-Aid and then we need to have a better plan than we have right now out there. I mean, I think the Junction Task Force, because I went down there with Seth and the whole group one night, and we talked about it, and there's a lot of things that could be done that would make it a safer place to cross the kids. But right now, I think if you put the long one and don't have the lights synchronized or some other things done down there, I don't think it's going to be the solution.
Councilmember Daniels-Cohen?
Thank you, Chief, for the report. I was up there last week, and I was sure you were going to maybe need to use a second guard. She is awesome, but it's pretty hairy. I mean, I stood there for about 30 minutes, and I was hoping we wouldn't have to do that. And just to back in the day, and I know people are getting tired of hearing me say that, but when I was a kid, which was a while ago, there was only one guard and one crossing. And it went from what was then, I guess, it could have been the Safeway or Turner Electric to what is now TJ's. The road has not gotten any wider. Now, what's happened is we've got more cars. But the road, it's not any wider than it was then. It's actually probably about the same width. So I think that crosswalk might be much safer and work a whole lot better, and not be a Band-Aid, but be a real fix to the situation there. Because doing the island hop, dangerous, takes a long time, and I just, I invite anybody who has to wait at that light for anybody to get across the street to go someplace else in Montgomery County and see what the traffic is like there. It's no big deal for a minute in the morning and a minute in the evening. It's a little bit hairy, but it's go any place else in Montgomery County. I don't even want to send you to Northern Virginia, because that is solid. That's solid parking lot all the time. So
I'm not saying that the crosswalk wouldn't
Yeah.
be the answer, but I just think when you redo something, let's do it in
All the way,
incremental parts so
yeah.
that it works in the long run. Sometimes we in government, we put quick Band-Aids on, and they don't solve it in the long run, and we end up spending more money.
yeah, I don't want to put a Band-Aid on it either. I want it to be ultimately fixed. So that
I think
it's
that's the
safe.
ultimate goal of
Yeah.
everyone.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Just to kind of just briefly talk about revenues, and this will show up if you want to in the fund summary, but I'm going to spend most of the time this evening, unless the council has questions, talking about expenditures. For next year, we are projecting speed camera revenues right at $3 million. Of that amount, about $833,000, and these are gross revenues, are estimated to come from the 2 new cameras on Carroll, assuming those are approved by the City Council. I did just want to mention that I had noted on the agenda cover sheet that we were expecting to bring an ordinance forward next week for those 2 new cameras. Not sure if there's a wrinkle or not, but as I believe I may have mentioned, ACS, which is the company that we contract with, was bought out by Xerox about 2 years ago, I believe, and so now everything is operating under the name of Xerox. They're in the 2002 nuclear-free list. Xerox was listed. Jesse actually had an email from, I guess, the person who compiled the list going back several years, indicating that Xerox's placement on that list was actually in error. They had a couple copiers, I guess, on nuclear subs or something of that nature. So as far as we know, their placement on the list, which is obviously outdated to begin with, was in error. Jesse has been in touch with the Nuclear Free Committee. We are asking them to re-sign the nuclear-free certification waiver now as Xerox, because we do have one for ACS. The practical issue is if there is a problem with amending their contract because they're now under the name of Xerox and you have 6 cameras and your entire speed camera program is technically out of compliance with the nuclear-free ordinance unless there's a waiver. So from staff's perspective, if we get the waiver signed by a representative as Xerox, our opinion is there shouldn't be an issue, but Jesse has shared what our plans are with the Nuclear-Free Committee, and we'll just kind of regroup tomorrow and see where we're at. I'm sorry, it's the certification of compliance. I apologize. It's not a waiver, but the certification of compliance. So I just wanted to mention that if you don't see the item on Monday's night's agenda, it will be because we're still working through that issue. But I think it points out an issue. I know the mayor had received an email from a former mayor kind of pointing out some of the difficulties with the nuclear-free ordinance, especially as companies may get acquired, and you have very large companies that may have entities that have nothing to do with nuclear activity, and we have one now. Kind of turning to expenditures, maybe the council could turn to page 118 in your budget binder. I'll just kind of walk through this, some of the highlights. Total expenditures are budgeted at roughly $3.36 million, as noted on this page and as well as on the agenda cover sheet. Disregarding for a minute the second guard at the Tacoma Junction, but as I submitted my budget to the council, full-time equivalents would increase by 1.5. There are a couple things happening. One, the officer that we have assigned to the gang task force in FY12, a portion of his salary was actually charged to the Special Revenue Fund. We had a grant. So there's 0.25 there. The research policy manager, which was, again, a grant-funded position in fiscal year 12, that grant is expiring, so that's your 0.5. And then we have proposed a new full-time position that I would like the chief maybe to come up and just talk briefly about. We shortened it for the purpose of this chart as a communications supervisor. It's actually a communications supervisor, emergency management coordinator. So, Chief, if maybe just for a few minutes you can just speak to why you feel this position is important.
This person would be supervisor in the communications section. We had to take an officer off the road. That was one of the positions we abolished 2 years ago. We ran into some issues. I had to take an officer off the road so they could supervise. The bigger part, which I'm looking for, is along with a supervisor, is emergency preparedness. As you know, Captain Corsi is retiring, and he's been our emergency preparedness person part-time. With the work that this committee has done over the last couple of years and the work we're doing with the county in preparing for emergencies at their emergency operations center, how we would react during emergencies, emergency disposal of debris, emergency assistance from the county, possibility of shelters. This has come, in my opinion, a full-time job. It won't be full-time, but it will be at least somebody that's all they deal with other than the communications center. And that comes together because when there is a major emergency, we center everything in the communications center where the information comes in, and then they work closely with the communications center in the county. Emergency preparedness, I think, is a major thing. I think we saw this summer what could happen to Tacoma Park when we had what some people would call a minor hurricane come through here. You all realized how many streets were closed down by trees. Being a tree canopy as we are, a major storm could shut the city completely down because we still have a lot of wires above because we're an older city and they haven't been removed to the ground. So you're looking at electrical issues. Our roads get closed off, that's a major issue. Emergency preparedness, there's a lot that goes into it. It gets more and more important. Most jurisdictions have a full-time person. Most of the municipalities are now doing that. Basically, Gaithersburg has a full-time person who we've kind of monitored how we make our job look in the job description. I know there's some that have some concerns. I think this is one of the most important positions that you could approve this year because I think it's the welfare and the safety of our city. Many of you were here when we had the blizzard of 2 years ago now, and how the city was shut down and some of the issues we ran into. I believe that the citizens would be better served with a person in the police department doing this. I think it works better with the Emergency Preparedness Committee. And as I go out the door, I have to tell you, of all the committees I've seen here in the city that has really worked hard and I'm not talking about task force, but a continuing committee, has been emergency preparedness, who have continually come before this council with excellent reports and moving forward. And there's some really good, active citizens and people that work in the community that have run that committee and done a good job. I think the future is that if we as a city are not prepared in a crisis, we as leaders of this city will have to face the wrath of our residents, and I don't think we ever want to be in the position we have to defend why we weren't prepared. Each year we work better at it, and each year we get more prepared, and with somebody doing it full-time and ready in an emergency, I think it would better serve the residents of Tacoma Park.
Let me just say, I totally agree. I've been working on emergency preparedness stuff at the regional level for 10 years, and the city manager and I are both going to have the opportunity on Saturday to go to a meeting in La Plata and get a tour of what happened in La Plata with the tornado and how they dealt with things and see the results of that, and that should be very interesting. Any other comments or questions? Okay.
Yes.
Oh,
Thank you.
Councilmember Schultz, you're pushing the wrong button.
Yeah, I know. Buttons are my undoing. I couldn't agree more that this is an important position. Absolutely.
Thank you.
Councilmember Diane Scott.
Yeah, I'm also, as you well know, as I said Monday night, the gaping hole that Captain Corsi leaves is the part I know about emergency preparedness. I know there's a huge other side to what he does. And as the council, the sitting council now knows, I've come before them every Monday during Emergency Preparedness Month for the last 2 to 3 years and given them a little bit of what we need to do as a city and what's available to us. So it's a huge undertaking and very important to keep our city, continue to keep our city safe and well prepared.
And I think, if you all remember, the committee did recommend approval of the position.
Yes.
Okay.
Are we still talking about the speed camera fund and just
Yes.
not talking about this issue, or are we moving away from the speed camera fund altogether?
I was going to keep going through the speed camera fund unless there's a question about the position. Kind of continuing on page 118, you'll notice the category that's services and charges. Virtually all of that line item or that category is attributable to the contractual payment we make to Xerox, who is our speed camera program vendor. So it is a function of the revenues that are actually collected. So as you look at that 1.15, that's what most of that is. On the miscellaneous, and I just want to note something for the council's benefit, if you happen to look at the CIP and the total that is shown for the speed camera fund, some of you may have noticed that it doesn't quite add up to what's in capital outlay listed on this page. And the reason for that is we had made the decision a year or so ago. It's all accounted for in the CIP. But we use the capital outlay line item in the speed camera fund to track more infrastructure-related projects. So what is noted as miscellaneous, the $155,000, is the money that we allocate for police equipment. That's going to include things such as field radio equipment, in-car mobile computers, a voice recorder system. We just, for tracking purposes, wanted to separate those items out from infrastructure-related items, just so as we go back and look historically, it's a little bit easier to delineate those things. Capital outlay is budgeted at just under $1.5 million, and what I would probably suggest for the purposes of discussing that is you actually go to the CIP. I think it'll make a little bit more sense, and that's there's a separate tab. It's page 110. If that's easier for everyone. Looks like everyone is there. The $155,000, not all of the items are accounted for directly in the CIP, but on page 110, if you look at towards the top of the page, there is a category called police equipment, which includes field radio equipment, mobile computers, and a voice recorder system. Those are the items, as well as just some unallocated money that is accounted for in that $155,000 that I just mentioned, if that makes sense to everyone. Going back just a few pages to page 112. This is where you see the breakout of the items that are classified as capital outlay in the speed camera fund. I was planning to talk about most of these this evening. The one that is referred to as the Ethan Allen Gateway Streetscape, with the council's concurrence, I'd like to talk about that Monday when Sarah Daines is here for her operating budget, because that's her project. As you'll probably note, we have $20,000 allocated for streetlight upgrades. These are new streetlights that we may get a request from a resident who has lighting concerns. The Houghton Lane gateways, the $30,000 is also a HCD project, which Sarah will be prepared to address. The ADA sidewalk retrofit project, I think as the council is aware, we've been trying to work fairly aggressively to address some of the ADA compliance issues with our existing sidewalks. As proposed, $600,000 is allocated for that purpose. We have $400,000 that is allocated for new sidewalk design and construction and traffic calming. $130,000 for the Ritchie Avenue traffic calming project. This is actual construction, Councilmember Siemens, which hopefully will get underway next fiscal year. And then, as I mentioned, the Ethan Allen Gateway Streetscape, which is something that Sarah will address. So in a nutshell, that's what the Speed Camera Fund budget looks like in terms of expenditures. I was going to maybe touch on one more thing, but I thought I'd wait and see if there's any questions about that.
There are. Councilmember
Okay.
Grimes.
Thank you. So, with some reluctance, I have to ask about the ADI sidewalk retrofit, because I get frequent email messages from constituents saying, why is the city ripping up perfectly good sidewalks, or perfectly serviceable, I should say? They don't perceive the issues. I realize that the ADA calls for instance, a certain lateral slope, that it has to be below a certain level and so on, and that some repairs are being done. And as I recall, the Public Works Director had said that it makes sense to do these repairs at a certain level of funding. In other words, you could go below it, and it just doesn't make economic sense to do that. I guess my question is, what's compelling us to do this work? Is there a legal threat? Is there, or I should say, a potential legal threat? Is there? Stop there. What's compelling us to do this?
In my mind, it's two things. One, I consider, and I think the federal law would agree with this, is that accessibility is a civil right. It's no different than other types of civil rights compliance. So I think, from my perspective, one, it's just the right thing to do. And I know Darrell has gotten numerous comments, which I find a little bit surprising, where someone will say, well, I don't have anybody in a wheelchair who lives in my neighborhood. I think that's just a really kind of poor attitude to take, and I think one is who lives in a particular neighborhood now may not be the people who live there eventually, and sidewalks are not just for people who live in that neighborhood. They are a means of access and for people reaching other points in the community. I do think there is a potential legal threat. Some of the council, we talked about this maybe a year or more ago. The Department of Justice has been very aggressive lately in terms of applying the Americans with Disabilities Act to infrastructure issues. When the law went into effect in the early 1990s, I was working in a human resources capacity at that time, and I think the initial focus of the law was very much employment-related. I think several years ago it switched also to looking at infrastructure-related issues. Fairfax County locally is under a compliance order with the federal government. There are other entities that
Montgomery County is under
Montgomery
compliance
County
order.
as well, where the federal government has actually come in and essentially forced them to spend a certain amount every year. So I think my primary reason to say to do this would be it's simply the right thing to do. But I think what gets entities into trouble is that you don't have a plan and you're not being aggressive in terms of dealing with the issues that you know you have. One of the complications I think Tacoma Park now has is we have done a study that identified the non-compliant areas that we have. And it's, like most things in life, it's more problematic once you've identified a problem and then you fail to address it. Darrell, is there anything you'd like to add?
I think you said anything I could say. I mean, I will say this issue comes up every time we start work. We try to describe these people in great detail, and I can tell you, once you try to put yourself in a position of someone who's less able, you'll see immediately why we're addressing the issues that we're addressing. In a neighborhood, in a community like ours, the sidewalks have been the way they've been for decades, so it is a bit of a change. The other thing I'll note is I can't drive anywhere these days without seeing ADA work taking place in the right-of-way. It's happening all over the place, and State Highway has been a moving force, and they move at a pretty glacial pace. So when you see State Highway doing something, clearly the temperature has changed, and there are more increasing concerns and awareness about the issue. We do work very carefully with the residents in the neighborhoods in terms of notification, in terms of explanation, in terms of ways to let them know what we're doing. We realize it can be an inconvenience. We try to get the process going through pretty quickly so we're not spending too much time in people's front yards. But we happily explain the differences and why to anybody who raises the question. So we have a pretty good examples of before and afters, and I did a presentation at the council in 2010 that showed pretty clearly what the benefit is to the work that we're doing.
This is very helpful. Thank you both.
And if I can just add 3 quick little things on that. I know that I've talked with colleagues in Fairfax County and Montgomery County about their compliance order issues, and they basically said, you want to avoid having the federal government, Department of Justice, and I think it falls under the division that somebody in our city heads.
That would be correct. It does.
That you really want to avoid them coming in at all costs, because as soon as they do, everything is under review. It's not just your sidewalks, it's things like what you have hanging on your walls that people who are blind can walk into, that they won't find. And it just opens up a can of worms, and you just don't want to go there. I had a resident who called me and said, when the work started up, gee, why is this going on? It's not needed in front of my house. You should take a look. So I did. And I believe they said that there was one offset in the sidewalk that was about a ½ inch, and that just didn't require all this work. And I looked, and in the half a block from that address, there were about 5 or 6 offsets, some of them up to 2 to 3 inches, where trees had heaved the sidewalk. And I just know, I say this every time, but I'll say it again, I know from spending a lot of time at Riderwood, where there are 3,000 people who are always in need of all of the help that they can get for getting around, even just the slightest little offset, a ½ inch in a sidewalk, where the slightest little side slope can put them on the ground. And I see it every day, and I see needing wider sidewalks to be able to accompany people. I see all these ADA issues, and so I'm always very supportive of trying to do this work at a good funding level.
Yeah, I would just add, when the Americans with Disabilities Act first came into effect, kind of speaking to Darrell's point about it, it can be very hard, I think, for people who do not have a disability to sort of comprehend the difficulty. But as part of our sensitivity training in the particular city I was working in, we were working with a disabled advocacy group, and we were each assigned a disability that we had to basically live with the entire work day. And I will tell you, I became much more aware of things in our building and things that I had never envisioned to be problems until I was actually struggling with them myself as someone who was in a wheelchair. So I think some of it's just difficult for all of us to comprehend what it's like for someone who is living with those constraints.
Councilmember Siemens.
Thank you, Mayor. Barb, I know that we kind of migrated to the CIP from the speed camera fund, so since you did that, I'm going to open this up to broader CIP budget. I just wanted to see where the additional or new lighting for the front of the community center is, if it's in here.
It is not in the CIP. Darrell is still working up pricing for that. It is not included in the budget at this time, but that's something
So that means it would be over a year away then?
No, what we're hoping to do is have some pricing that we can bring back to the council for reconciliation purposes.
Okay, thank you.
In just a matter of 10 days.
Thank you.
Councilmember Mayo.
Thank you, Mayor. 2 questions. There's 20,000 reserved for new streetlights, and I wonder if we're doing all that we can in terms of having those new streetlights and the fixtures be as high efficiency as possible. As you probably remember, the motivation behind the Task Force on the Environmental Action recommending the city acquire or launch a public-private partnership to acquire the streetlights in the city is to try to save money by reducing energy use. And so if we're putting in new streetlights, that's a way to do it. I know that there are neighborhood concerns around having lights look the same from one pole to the next, and so that's an aesthetic issue to deal with, but I just wonder if we're using the best we can.
The answer is kind of yes and no. It depends on where the request comes from. If it's a request that based on an existing street light on a utility pole, that's under the control of PEPCO, so we have to work through them to get the lighting either added or changed. In a case where it's an incandescent light, any change that we make will be an improvement in energy efficiency as well as improved lighting levels. So sometimes it depends on the existing conditions that we're working with. If there's no light on the pole, adding a light is, of course, going to add to the energy use. But some of it just depends on the existing situation. This year, for the first time, we used those funds to address the target practice that cars have been doing on Carroll Avenue related to our decorative streetlights. Those are induction lighting, which is more efficient and long-lasting than the type of lights that's currently used on the utility poles that PEPCO provides. So we have ordered and should have installed before the end of this fiscal year 7 replacement lights that are induction lights and efficient. So when it's the lights that are under our own control and management, the council made a decision to move to induction lighting several years ago as the best technology at the time. In our Flower Avenue Green Street process, we're asking for the design folks to get us up to the next level, which we're assuming will be an LED-type light, and we'll be using their knowledge to move us further along that path. So up till now, the city-controlled lights have been induction, but we may be changing technologies if that's the recommendation based on the study. So it's a little bit of a mixed bag.
Okay, thank you. And my second question is, with the ADA compliance work on sidewalks, which I'm totally happy to support solely on the basis of it being the right thing to do, I think it would be really helpful for the city to, let's say within the next 6 months, prepare a report that just summarizes the progress we're making and the progress we expect to make in the next year. So we have the, 2008 sidewalk study that showed the small percent of the city's 41 miles that are already in ADA compliance, and then the breakdown from there. And so since then, we've made some progress each year, and that would be a very helpful report. It shows, when we'll be finished. It shows, so we can, for budget purposes, it would be really useful for that, and it just shows progress. It shows a record of success in dealing with it.
Great idea. Any other?
Okay, that's it for questions on that.
One thing I would just mention about the allocation for ADA work as well as the $400,000 for new sidewalks and traffic calming. As I mentioned earlier, this budget was predicated on the council's approval of the 2 new cameras on Carroll and the receipt of those monies. And I think I mentioned this when I presented my budget. But what Darrell and I have talked about is probably splitting that $1 million worth of work into a fall cycle and a spring cycle, because obviously we'll need to collect the money from the new cameras before we can spend it. The last thing that I wanted to just touch on with the speed camera fund, and perhaps it's best illustrated if you go to page 25, this is in the fund summaries. And probably keep your CIP page handy.
Too late.
Okay, that's all right. I can still walk you through it. It's towards the very beginning. It's the entitled fund summaries, but it's page 25.
It's the last page of the section right before general government.
Right before page 26.
That would be another way of describing it. I just wanted to just note the the projected ending year fund balance for the speed camera fund for FY12, which you'll see is just under $884,000. And then for the end of FY13, we're looking at having about $539,000. So 2 things I wanted to point out about this is, one is that we would be spending down some of the fund balance during FY13, which is kind of what the money is for. It may look as if we have a lot of money that we're leaving on hand at the end of FY13, but as I noted in the agenda cover sheet, we will have a significant radio system acquisition in FY14, as well as some other equipment. So my recommendation to the council is, whether we do it formally or informally, is that about $378,000 of that roughly $539,000 be reserved to make sure that we have enough cash on hand going into FY14 to make those purchases for the police department, which does include a very sizable, from a monetary standpoint, investment in our radio system. So I just, as you looked at this, I just didn't want you to look at the money and wonder why we're not spending it. There's a reason why we're not. And unless there's any other questions, that's really all I was going to cover tonight.
Just curious, as a matter of budget handling, is it not possible, or is it just not necessary to transfer that money out of the speed camera fund into some other reserve fund? This is just a question of budget mechanics.
Yvonne and I had talked about this, and I think probably when the budget in its final form comes to the council, what we would probably recommend is that the funding remain in the speed camera fund because it is a restricted fund, but that we essentially reserve the portion that I just mentioned, actually show it as a reserve fund balance. That is a council choice, but it would actually show that there's a purpose for it sitting there being unexpended.
So restricted and unrestricted.
Reserved or unreserved, yeah. They call it different things, but yes, that we would, kind of like on the general fund balancing where you see a reservation of funds, we would do the same thing in this fund.
Councilmember Mayo.
Yes, a related question, and breaking away from this budget for a second. I think the budget currently contemplates $1 million being put aside into the equipment replacement reserve. So this is, in some form, essentially another $300,000 on top of that $1 million for equipment replacement.
That's closer to $400,000, yes.
Okay, 400.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, and I would just mention, I know, Councilmember Mayo, you had asked a question about the equipment replacement reserve. One of the, I did some work on it earlier today. For the first reconciliation meeting, I can't remember the exact date, May, whatever it is, we'll have some information in the packet, basically giving you our best guess of looking out about 20 years of what will be coming out of the equipment replacement reserve, and kind of different scenarios. I did this for the council last year, sort of showing what happens at different funding levels, because I think that was fairly striking for some folks last year. So we'll have that information, which I think should help get a better understanding of that.
Great. And just my last question. We've heard the Chief talk about, and Ms. Matthews, you talk about with some cameras, revenue holding up year after year, and in other speed cameras, revenue declining.
Right.
And I think it'd be really helpful, again, it doesn't have to be in the context of the budget process, but later in the year, just getting documentation camera by camera on where those are going, again, and that's about projection of future revenue.
Sure, we can do that.
Thanks.
Councilmember Schultz.
Following up what Councilmember Mayle just mentioned, it seems to me that the Carroll Avenue speed cameras are going to perform over the long run differently than the ones on New Hampshire and University, because I would imagine that most of the traffic on Carroll Avenue is local Tacoma Park traffic, whereas on those three big streets, an awful lot of it is traffic from out of the county, out of state, people that travel that way very infrequently, not to mention the people that commute every day. But Carroll, I'm just wondering, thinking that over time we might experience that the Carroll Avenue cameras will
Go down.
they'll be effective, and they'll just go down because people will be more careful, because it's a local street for many people.
I think certainly there's, in my mind, a difference between the way New Hampshire Avenue functions and Carroll Avenue. I know in talking to the staff about it, obviously you have traffic going to the hospital. People who may be getting to the hospital via Carroll, obviously that may be impacted eventually whether or not the hospital is allowed to move. But I think there's certainly some differences. I don't know, Councilmember Schultz, that I think it's accurate to say that all the traffic on Carroll it's more local probably than New Hampshire,
local.
but it's not strictly local.
I might add, these two cameras are going to be different from anything we had before. These are going to be movable cameras, so we'll be able to move them up and down in both directions on Carroll. We've never been able to do that before, which people know where the cameras are, they slow down. If we move them, which we will be moving them, that's going to change it. We feel, and my staff that did the, the research, we feel that this is an area that I think is not going to slow down.
Oh, really?
I would disagree with you. I think it's going to be an area that, for 5 years that I've been here, I've heard nothing but, and our traffic officers made a living working Carroll Avenue quite a bit, and even with the hospital, which would definitely reduce traffic, I still think it's a very active road, and we think, and that's why we requested the new cameras, so we can move them around, not in an effort, because if you slow them down in one area and they speed up, as you well know, if you watch New Hampshire sometime, they come down there and they slow and right up the hill again, and that's when we usually set radar up at the top of the hill to get them after they come through the camera. With these cameras, we can move them around. I don't think, and I might be wrong, but I think you're going to find that that's going to be pretty consistent, because it's a new way of looking at speed enforcement, because every time we come up with something, the speeders try to beat us at our game, and this is just another way of doing enforcement.
So I know that the one on University up near Merrimack, I thought that was a portable one as well.
There's a new portable, we're getting new cameras.
This is a different from that.
Right, we're going to get 3 new what they call portable cameras.
Okay, really
which we can do a lot more with.
Okay.
The only 2 cameras that have went down, so to speak, would be on Ethan Allen Avenue.
Right.
But we still get tickets there every day. It's just not what it was when we first started. But for the other cameras, they're pretty consistent. It hasn't changed, and now we're in year 3 of the program.
Can we get that sound effect of speed again?
Huh?
Get that sound effect of speed again?
Chief,
Come back.
when you did the tests on Carroll Avenue, did you collect any statistics there on how many were local or in-state and how many were out?
Now, we'd have to go through each ticket if we could see what state it is, which we can see, but no, we didn't. Because what we did is the survey takes speeding violations. That's all it does in the survey.
Okay.
It's something we could probably look at down the road to see how many are out of state, but no, we didn't do that. We just did, it's a car survey. How many cars come through, how many cars, what speeds they're doing, what the ranges and everything like that.
Without the late fee, are the out-of-state ones going to be harder to collect?
They go to the credit bureau like everyone else, he said.
No, no, not really, because we flag them, and then we go to the credit bureau, and one of the things we're learning is no one wants us going to the credit bureau. Because once you get it, then it's a process to get it off, and credit bureaus move at a very slow pace, as we've learned on just one case we've been working as a group for the last month. So I think most people, the ones who pay generally pay, and then there's ones we have to track down. So, but we're going to track them down. The difference is it's going to be flagging them and then the credit bureau, which are 2 serious things, really.
And you've heard it on that for Carroll Avenue for the 5 years you've been here. I've heard it for 20 years.
I mean, I really don't think I think it's one of those roads that'll be like New Hampshire. We'll be consistent in what we do. It does slow people down. You got to realize, just because we still have violations, and yes, we are collecting revenue, we're still reducing accidents. And you got to I look at University Boulevard. When I got here 5 years ago, I mean, that's all we talked about was pedestrians, and we, knock on wood, we've done good there. I think New Hampshire, and Councilman Schultz has pointed out, the accidents are down almost 400%. Pedestrian accidents are down. We haven't had one in about 2 years, 3 years now. So I think the cameras are serving their purpose, which I think sometimes people think it's all about the revenue. It does make a difference. I was talking to my compatriots in Montgomery County, and their traffic officer says, you've taken all the speeding tickets away from us with the speed cameras. And we tell them, well, you need to work on something else now. But they're working. But speeding is a part of our society, and I don't think we're ever going to solve it completely. But I think we have made the streets of Tacoma Park safer. And as a result of making them safer, we have a little more money to do some things for our residents. I think that's the way we have to look at it.
And as we've shared those statistics on the drop in the accidents resulting from the placement of the speed cameras, as we've shared those with officials from other jurisdictions, they're amazed And last night at the Montgomery chapter meeting, they said, have you done a press release on that? Have you talked to the Washington Post reporter? People are always asking these same questions about, well, speed cameras are just revenue generators, and people need to hear that there's a real reduction in the accidents and in the pedestrian accidents. And maybe Councilmember Siemens was suggesting that maybe as part of the announcement of the installation of the Carroll Avenue cameras, we might want to do a press release or talk to the press about what you gave us, whatever it was.
Well, I
a
think
month
you
or
ought to
two
know
ago.
me by now. We've gotten the word out in the papers, and we'll continue to do
Well,
that.
people haven't
Might
seen
have
it. We
gotten the
need
word
to.
out to the papers, but it hasn't been in the papers.
Yeah, we need to do more.
The problem is, for some reason, and the staff knows this, because we always get warnings when there's going to be a story that the municipalities talk really good. We'll get a 5 o'clock. It's going to be on the 6 o'clock news tonight. For whatever reason, we have escaped the view of other Chevy Chase has gotten the most
Right.
because of their thing on Connecticut Avenue. And knowing both chiefs as I do, they're constantly on the defensive. I think because we run such a good program, and it is doing what it's all about, I think we've been left alone. And we really have. I mean, the press has not come to us in a long time, and it's usually been positive. We can continue, and when we put the new cameras, we will obviously put something more positive at once again. But I think because of the nature, because you don't hear Gaithersburg's program being spoken about or Rockville's. It's always Chevy Chase. And for whatever reasons, but we have not been under the scrutiny, because there's a certain reporter that they're always doing stories, and they are negative, and I agree with you, Mayor. It's frustrating to us when we know how much good that comes out of these programs.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so we're finished with the speed camera? All right, we'll move to the Public Works budget. And I'll
Darrell,
just
why don't
point
you-
out that we were right on schedule when we started that, and now we're behind by a good bit.
Because it was the first
So,
item.
well, we took a long time on that one, just hope we don't take as much longer on all of the rest, or we'll be here till midnight.
I'll try to do my part to pick up the pace if I can. I'll just, as I do, make up some introductory comments. There were a few issues that Darrell and I had talked about this afternoon that I thought might be helpful specifically for her to address. The overall operating budget for the Public Works Department is up by about 3.8%, or roughly $153,000 compared to budgeted expenditures for fiscal year 2012. One of the things I did just want to note, this will sort of cross over into the Stormwater Management Fund, but as the council probably recalls, I have proposed a new full-time position that we refer to as a Special Projects Coordinator. 60% of that position is proposed to be funded out of the general fund, out of the city, it shows up in the city engineers division budget, with the balance 40% charged to the stormwater management fund. I thought it might be helpful just for Darrell to spend a few minutes just to talk about what she sees the position doing and how that would help both her and the city engineer in terms of their workload.
Sure. Basically, and I think most folks know this, but in terms of staffing at the Public Works Department, primarily our staff are field staff. They're the sanitation workers, the street workers, guys who maintain the parks. There are professionals as well, the city engineer, the city arborist, and myself as the director. Anytime we have a construction project or a design engineering project, it's going to be either me or the city engineer that oversees those projects. We don't go any deeper than that in terms of staffing levels. So one of the things that we are running up against more and more frequently is a limit in terms of our own time to oversee the work and basically make sure that it's carrying on in a rapid way, but also in a well-designed way. And as you all know, being the representatives from your ward, communication is key in our community in terms of understanding the projects. So what I see this person doing is basically taking on a yeoman's job of overseeing construction projects, working with the design engineers and some of the traffic calming as well as sidewalk work. We also have a great deal of utility work taking place in our city, and this will continue for the next several years. So the work of overseeing the utility companies, implementing the permit conditions, making sure they do what they're supposed to do, both before, during, and after they work through our city. is something that could take quite a bit of time. And currently, we just don't have the staff hours available to do that on any given day. Myself or the city engineer are overseeing 4 projects concurrently. It gets a little chaotic. So the number of projects that we have taken place is beyond our staffing level in terms of time-wise. And we want to make sure that we're doing the proper work. Oftentimes, when you're got a project in design, once you start heading into construction, there's other things that need to be taken into account, or additions or kind of project creep, as you might say, where you can improve several situations at once. And when we have these kind of overlaying projects in limited time, you can't always do the best job in terms of coordinating and keeping the communication up. Also, I think this will help us quite a bit with scheduling. Right now, we're sort of try our best in terms of scheduling between the utilities and ourselves. We just recently learned, after waiting years for Wildwood Drive to get paved, that Washington Gas now has a new project on Wildwood Drive. We were weeks away from paving Wildwood Drive. So now we're going to have Washington Gas coming in to do a new project on a section of a street. Thank goodness we found out 2 weeks before, so we can hold off our paving until after the utility company finishes their work. So it's that kind of stuff that if we had a very active person kind of constantly haranguing the utility companies, what project next, where else are you doing in design, we could help to alleviate some of that, which now has a tendency to be haphazard, and we're on the utilities' mercy versus being very proactive ourselves with providing them our construction schedules. So ideally, if we find the right kind of fit with a person, it's basically somebody who understands construction, somebody who understands communication, can work with contractors and the public alike, and can multitask in terms of, overseeing construction work. So it's going to largely be a field position, someone who is out there in the field coordinating with our contractors, our inspectors, or our design engineers, as well as making sure that the behind-the-scenes stuff is taking place, tracking the billing, overseeing the work that's being done on all kinds of levels. So it'll be another set of hands and brain and eyes in the office that can oversee some of these projects that we have, as you can see in the CIP or in the Speed Camera Fund, a lot of money set up and queued up for projects that are either been designed or are going into design.
Sounds like me.
Yeah. Any other questions on the project scope or the staff scope?
No.
I can jump into a few items of the Public Works budget unless there's something else we wanted to do.
No, I think what might be helpful, just maybe as Darrell kind of talks through this, is maybe to refer to page 52. Darrell, this is just a summary, and maybe we can just note some of what I think I asked you to talk about will show up when we see significant increases. We just talked about the difference in wages. There's obviously a fairly sizable increase in services and charges. And Darrell, is that where your contractual payment, your contractual work and building maintenance shows up?
It does to some degree. It's easier for me to go through on a division-by-division basis, but I can make that pretty quick. What you'll see in the administrative budget, of course, is that 60% of the full-time position that we've just referenced, as well as the sustainability money that's been allocated for programs. So that...
Actually, I think the new position actually shows up in the city engineer division.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just wanted to clarify that.
Okay, sorry about that, my misunderstanding. 40% of it I thought was stormwater, and 60% ends up in the city engineering
Right, we can
division.
certainly change that if
Okay.
you'd be more comfortable.
No, that's fine. So in terms of changes over this year to next, that's where that will be reflected. The building maintenance division basically is responsible for maintenance and cleaning of the city facilities. Some of the notable things to look at that I'm looking at for next year is our utility costs are actually going down. It's kind of a perfect storm of improvements in efficiency of equipment that we have in the building, as well as the county's buying cooperative that we participate with for our electricity prices has been getting very good pricing for electricity. We also will be the full year next year with our 20 to 25% of our electricity coming from the solar panels on this building in Public Works. So we're going to see quite an improvement in utility costs based on reduced cost as well as efficiency. We've identified what we call special projects in the building maintenance budget. In the past, these might have not been allocated as a special project, but sort of absorbed in the overall operating budget. But because of the nature of the work and the frequency of requests, things like replacing all the water fountains, that the building maintenance folks have the responsibility for that. We've had an unreasonable number of, what do you call it, people, I can't think of the word, not vagrants, vandalism. Vagrant was all that came to my mind. Vandalism on the water fountains that have just continuing year to year. So we're going to we would like to replace our fountains with as vandal-proof a fountain as you can. And also, because they've all been installed at different times, we've got every single fountain has a different set of valves and pipes and things, so it makes it harder to repair. So we want consistency and improve the fountains. The annual community center paintings, particularly the second level, because of the heavy use of this facility. We didn't originally envision that it would have to take place on an annual basis, but it does. We've also included in this year's budget funding for the carriage house painting, both the exterior walls as well as the roof of the carriage house. Snow guards on the roof edges of this building, if any of you have been parked in the lower level parking level right after a snowstorm, just at the wrong time when it's starting to warm up. Big pile of snow sliding off our overhanging walkways.
Can you just say a little bit more about the Thomas Siegler?
Carriage house?
In terms of kind of who owns, who maintains, what that is?
The facility is, now I'm going to get it wrong, I'm sure, but the carriage house is owned by the city, but there's an MOU with Historic Tacoma for the use and programming of that building. So the MOU was developed many, many years ago, and we all agree that it's in need of updating. But the basic understanding is that the hard maintenance work, if there's a water line that breaks or an issue that takes place like painting, it's the city's responsibility. A lot of the garden maintenance work, the programming, the use of the grounds is overseen by HTI. It's a recommendation that I've made that we'll continue to talk about next year is potentially, and I'll just throw this out there, people may think it's a horrible idea, because HTI is involved in using that facility more than certainly we are. My facility maintenance folks don't go out to it unless we've been told there's a problem. Is to allocate funding in a separate fund for HTI to use for maintenance of that building. And then as the painting is needed, as a window replacement is needed, as a if they're talking about wanting to put a alarm system in, those types of things, they can be allocated a certain amount of funding, and then it's very clear what that funding is, how much is used from year to year, and they can allocate it as they see best fit to match with their programming and use of the facilities. So that's just something to consider, but currently, right now, any maintenance monies is absorbed primarily within the building maintenance portion of the Public Works
And you do have a painting budget in this year's budget?
Yes, in a special project, I've set aside an allocation of $9,000 for the exterior painting of the carriage house and the roof.
Where does that show up?
It's in my special projects, which is 6142 or 42.
Yeah, it shows up on page 56 under the category services and charges.
Yeah, you don't have my line items, sorry, but I think the only other thing that I haven't mentioned is we do have some HVAC controls that we'd like to incorporate and have the computerized access. Currently, all the HVAC equipment in this building can be accessed via computer off-site or on-site to update and change. We don't have that ability for the Public Works facility, so we'd like to bring that online. There is some funding which, for exterior lighting, it was allocated for the flagpole lighting, but we have been able to make some repairs, and I think there was a decision made after we developed this budget not to maintain 2 flagpoles but 1. So there is some funding in the special projects for exterior lighting, which if we decide not to light 2 flagpoles, we could use that money for bridge lighting in the exterior. Again, my thoughts originally when I brought lighting folks out to take a look at that is we were basically kind of going bigger. What we were thinking was to have pedestrian-level street lighting along the sidewalk, both on the Maple side as well as the Philadelphia side, probably 4 on each side for a total of 8 lights, similar to what you see on Carroll Avenue, that same type, 12-foot high type of lighting, as well as some surface-level lighting on the bridge so that you wouldn't light up, you wouldn't be shining on the building, you would just be lighting the bridge surface. The funding that I have for exterior lighting work could be used for that bridge lighting the low-level ground lighting, but not the street lighting. If that was of interest, it would take additional funding. But I think we could handle bridge lighting with the money that's in the budget currently.
Can I suggest that because of the large amount of small projects like the Thomas Eagler House, bridge lighting, flag lighting, that all seem to be ensconced in this services and charges thing, that it would be really helpful, I think, to have a breakout of what that $316,400 comes, is derived, is made up of. Because most of these projects are, I'm sure there's a lot of small projects that you wouldn't normally, we wouldn't want you to itemize in the budget, but for purposes of our discussion, I think it would be helpful, because I think a lot of them are really important.
Yeah, Councilmember Schultz, earlier when Darrell started talking, I'd written myself a note on this page that before the budget's finalized, to basically put a little bit more detail in about these projects.
In terms of equipment maintenance, the city maintains about 76 vehicles. I just took a look at our fiscal year 11 report, because we haven't finished the 12 report yet, but about 77% of our mechanical maintenance work is done in-house, leaving 23% for outside work. The cost of fuel will be reflected in that budget. It has, of course, gone up. The Public Works budget only includes Public Works vehicles and city admin fleet. The police fuel costs have been allocated to the police department, so you'll see those costs in their budget. We also do have 2 fuel tanks on site, one for gasoline and one for diesel. We've been very diligent in meeting state and federal requirements for inspection, testing, monitoring. Our fuel tanks were installed in 1986, so they're getting some years on them, and you will see that in fiscal year 15, we anticipate replacing the fuel tanks. But currently, they're operating very well. There's no risk of leakage. With the construction that we just completed up at Public Works, we got a first-hand view underneath and around those fuel tanks, and we're very pleased by what we saw. So we're in good shape there, but they will be getting a lot of age on them, and they do need to be replaced. Again, that's not something for next year, but in fiscal year 15. The right-of-way budget, the major focus, of course, is the maintenance of city space, streets, parks, playgrounds, snow and ice response, leaf collection. Our Miller paver that you allocated funding for this year just arrived last week. So once we get our staff gone through a training program, we're going to find a little quiet, out-of-the-way road to practice on, get our learning curve up, and then you'll see us out there patching away. Also in the right-of-way division is where you see streetlight costs, and they are actually a very large portion of individual item in the city budget, to the tune of over $200,000 a year for electricity as well as maintenance of the streetlights that we pay to Pepco. The solid waste maintenance budget, obviously managing trash, recycling, and yard waste pickup, running the electronics and computer drop-off and the CFL program, as well as our waste oil and antifreeze collection. We are increasing the number of trash and recycling containers that we're purchasing this year from previous historical levels so that we can add more containers around the town. We also have a cooperative agreement that we are working on with a company called Outdoor Signal, Outdoor Advertising. They provide trash and recycling containers, very attractive trash and recycling containers with an advertising portion. They're going to be coming through the city next week to meet with me and show me where they've identified the locations for additional containers. They provide the maintenance, cleaning, emptying if we want.
Kind of like we had with the bus stops?
Yes. Yeah. Mm-hmm. The county tip fees are stable on a cost basis. Our actual weight is dropping in terms of trash. And our revenue from recycling, we've actually generated some revenue this year. The market is improving, but that's an incredibly variable item that can change year to year, so we never anticipate much money from it. Some years we're pleasantly surprised, and other years we're just not disappointed. The gardens budget, of course, we have a staff of 2 full-time people. It's largely supplemented by temporary labor. We have added an increase in the amount of temporary labor that we're asking for funding for in the gardens budget this year. We're increasing the number of garden spaces primarily through our stormwater program and the bioretention basins that we have. And keeping up with the maintenance is what's being envisioned with that increase in funding. There are several projects that are planned for fiscal year 13, including Hefner Park, the front of Hefner Park, not the playground area, but the front of the building is in some serious need of some updating. Hudson Avenue, where we're going to have a bioretention basin, will be planted. And then the Grant Avenue side of this building, which we weren't able to get to this year, will be incorporated into a planting design. In terms of the urban forest budget, obviously our annual planting and maintenance cycle, our bulk buy program continues, and this budget assumes that $100 per tree supplemental funding from the city for the bulk buy program. That continues to be very popular, and we're very pleased with it, and we would like to encourage more people to participate, both in the program itself as well as the $100 for assisting to purchase a tree, bringing the price down to half. This is the program budget that also handles our invasives management program, and so a lot of the invasives removal work that's being done in city-owned areas is funded through that budget. And, of course, the tree permit removal and tree protection program is overseen by that budget. The city engineer's budget, a half-time engineer, half of the time of our engineer is funded out of the city engineer's budget, the other from stormwater, and a quarter of an administrative assistant. The primary portion of that budget is split between subcontract work and engineering services. The type of things that are covered in subcontract work could be speed humps, minor street repairs, sidewalk repairs that are not included in the ADA work. The engineering costs are inspection services, survey services. The city engineer also oversees the resurfacing, but the funding for that is included in the CIP, and we had a presentation a couple weeks back about that. And then the city engineer also oversees the utility permitting. So that, in a nutshell, is a little bit of the function as well as the focus of budget changes from this year to next year in Public Works.
Good, thanks. We'll go to questions. Councilmember Sniffer.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for this rapid tour through the Public Works budget. Of course, I'm delighted to, see the construction basically done, and
It's a wonderful building to work in, and you could never say that before.
You could never say that before. I mean, it's really pretty, it's very cool, actually, the whole thing. There's so many cool features that they were able to get in,
And have we scheduled
and that was my question.
Barb and I spoke about that at our monthly meeting today. We're going to get our calendars out.
We're going to get our calendars out. I think, truthfully, part of the challenge is it's just been extremely busy, and so planning something, I think we're looking at maybe a Saturday, possibly sometime in June. Our assessment is the gray water system will probably be in. That's the last piece of the project that's out there. We want to make sure that we get a date set far enough in advance that we can advertise the open house in the city newsletter, which is getting ready to go to press for May very soon. And I also need to be able to give our communications office a heads up to basically do some display boards and things of that nature.
And we want to do it before school's out.
Yes.
We will do our best.
Did we cover your question?
Yeah. You guys knew my question before I asked it. The second one I wanted to ask about is, could you explain for the public the highway user fee drop? It's fairly dramatic.
User fee?
The revenue from highway user fees in FY12 went from $131,000 to $86,000 in FY13, and public needs to hear it.
Obviously, there's still a lot to be resolved at the state legislature, and there was extensive lobbying done prior to FY12 by the league and individual municipalities, including Tacoma Park, and there was a kind of an increase that was not necessarily guaranteed to continue. The figure that is showing for FY13 was given to us by the Maryland Municipal League, and just a couple days before the budget came to the council, we reconfirmed, given everything going on at the state legislature, that was still the best figure to use. As was the case last year, where we got kind of an unexpected bump at the end, in a positive direction, thankfully. That could happen. It just depends when the legislature returns and if anything happens in this area. Mayor Williams, is there anything you wanted to add, since I know this is a major issue for the Legislative Committee, which you chair?
Yeah, I was going to say, yes, a lot of work has been put in it. I probably put in at least 30 hours on this particular topic, and I'm sorry to say, I don't think it's going to do anything. I don't think it's going to change. I don't think there's much chance of anything happening with the special session. The latest word is it's going to be either 1 or 2 day session. They're going to have everything agreed to, come in, do it, leave. They don't want to pay for hotels or anything. It's just, come on in for the day and do the work, and don't complicate it with anything other than what they absolutely have to do. So the figure you have in the budget is probably what it'll stay
Yeah,
at.
the only positive is at least it's not as low as it was in FY11.
Right.
Yes, that's true. Should look on the bright side. Thank you. It could be a lot worse. I didn't used to think it could get worse, but thank you. My last question. I don't actually, I know this has been explained to me, and I'm confessing my ignorance here. I don't actually remember how the tree fund balance works, where it shows up in the budget, how much is in it now. Could you give me a little walkthrough?
I can start with just an explanation of the tree fund,
Right.
where it comes from, which is the payment of fee in lieu of or fines, establishes the funding in the tree fund. We use that money to offset the costs of tree planting in the budget, and I think they're equal at this point. We use the expenditure rate for tree planting, which in this budget I believe is $90,000, comes from our tree fund money. I may have complicated things, but
No, what I was just going to add, and I always get this term wrong, so Yvonne's probably going to correct me momentarily, but the funding comes in and essentially, correct me if I'm wrong, Yvonne, it's considered deferred revenue?
Yeah, when the money comes in, it's put in a fund, it's called deferred revenue. And as we put it in the budget, it becomes appropriated as revenue that we're recognizing at that point.
Right, so you'll actually, if you look at general fund revenues, you'll actually see a line item. And Darrell might have to help me with the timing on this, but I think when we, particularly the balance was growing, and when we were really kind of hitting the skids financially in FY11 and struggling, that I believe may have been the first year, I'm not positive about that we were just getting such a growing balance in the tree fund that we made the decision that we would fund the public tree planting in the street right-of-way with an allocation from the tree fund. We did that in FY11, we did it in FY12, we're doing it again in FY13. So the balance is going down considerably because we've been allocating, I guess during those 3 fiscal years, if the council approves this budget as proposed, would have allocated somewhere in the neighborhood of $60,000 to $70,000 from the tree fund for public tree planting. Did I answer your question, make you more, I feel like I lost you somewhere in the last 5 seconds.
There was a lot of really useful information in what you said, but I didn't hear you say, maybe I missed it, I didn't hear you say how much is in the fund.
Yvonne, I think we looked at this, we were allocating, I think about $33,000 is my recollection, and I can look that up really quickly. I think as proposed for FY13. And do you remember, Yvonne, what the balance was before that proposed allocation? You had looked it up.
I don't know the current number, but it may be, something like 39,000.
Yeah, Councilmember Snipper, I misspoke. It was 22,000 that is proposed to be allocated for fiscal year 13.
Right, so the permits are 12 and the fund is 22, the tree fund is 22 in the budget. So there's the 34. Right. Okay, great. Thank you.
Councilmember Schultz.
On page 52, I'm sorry, the first page in Public Works there, talks about recyclable sales, and that you're projecting proposed recyclable sales revenue of about $10,000, and I think we mentioned, or you mentioned, that it was a very unpredictable figure because it depends on what the market
economy.
is. I'm trying to, so that's income to the city. We also, I guess, through recycling, we reduce our tipping fees. Is that a significant amount of money that we save?
The reduction in tipping fees?
Yes.
Far outweighs the amount that we get from revenue.
Oh,
Cost
yes.
avoidance is really the driver of
Oh,
recycling
it is.
programs, yeah.
Could you give an order of magnitude?
Well, we're estimating we're going to recycle about 1,500 tons of recycling at, I believe the current tip fee is $62 a ton. If anybody's got a quick calculator, you can figure out what that cost avoidance figure is.
$1,500?
$62 and $1,500, yeah.
Wow, I don't have a calculator, but,
93,000.
okay.
So the driver by far is the cost
Okay.
avoidance.
Yeah, because I was thinking, gosh, if that's all the money we make off of recycling, we're only doing it for moral reasons. But I see that that's not entirely the case, or even part of the case. On the page 54, under under administration, services and charges, I guess I think I know what the answer to this is, this drop going across in the figures for adopted 12 was 198,000, and then, but the estimated for F12 is 41, and I presume that has something to do with this allocation of sustainability,
That's exactly what it has to do with.
and we didn't, it was the money we allocated, but we just did not
Yeah,
spend.
at this point in the budget, for budget projection purposes, I think I mentioned this before, I have assumed, I think I assumed, Darrell, that, I need to go back and look whether I assumed any of the 150,000 was expended or not. I can look very quickly.
Originally, we assumed some,
Yeah.
20 or 40 grand.
No, let's see. Yeah, actually, at this
Whatever
point,
the amount,
no, I
that's the
assumed,
reason.
I think initially, when we were talking about the SAIC proposal, I had, during a preliminary part of the budget process, had assumed we would spend about $50,000 this year, and then I subsequently changed that to zero.
Did you?
Right.
Yeah.
For this year. I mean, obviously, if we're able to do something this year, the funding is there, that's not problematic, but just
Yeah.
for projection purposes.
Okay. My next question refers on page 57, the box, the performance and workload measures. It says measurement is expenditures for facility maintenance by contractor. And it's roughly projected to be 100,000. I was just sort of curious, who are we referring to here by these
Facility maintenance contractors?
Yeah.
It could be anything from repair services for our HVAC or plumbing, things that we can't do in-house ourselves, to service contracts we have, like the the pest control company, the fire suppression equipment testing, all those types of things that you have to allocate money from for folks to come in and service your equipment. Or
The kind of thing that a homeowner, do-it-yourselfer, just wouldn't want to get involved with.
Yes, I mean, we also have our own in-house facility staff that do a great deal of the PMs and the maintenance,
Right.
but for some of the specialized repairs or things that require outside services, that's what covers those costs.
Okay. On page 61, you have under the right-of-way maintenance, I guess I'm a little puzzled by something. It talks about under management objectives about the 1, 2, 3, 5th bullet down. It says management objective is to respond to pothole reports or emergency requests within 24 hours, and then to respond to all non-emergency service requests within 2 weeks of receipt. And I can appreciate the difference, but I guess what I'm sort of sensing is that there's been some pothole situations in my ward that I've been mentioning about for a long time, and we just haven't been able to seem to get the people out there to do anything about it. So can you talk about that a little bit, about what you're really driving at with this?
Oh, well, when we get a call for a pothole, we can dispatch within 24 hours for a crew to go out with cold patch and do a temporary repair. So that's what takes place for some of those. If it's a patch that is not able to be temporarily repaired and needs to get on a maintenance schedule, then that's something that would have to be programmed into either our in-house or our contractor's maintenance.
And I guess then the question that evolves from that is sort of how do you, I mean, what constitutes something that can't be done quickly as opposed to something that has to be put on a maintenance schedule?
It would be the type of road defect it is. If it's alligator cracking, stuff like that, that's not something that you can patch with a pothole patch. If it's a chunk of asphalt that's come out of the pavement and can be filled with temporary patch, then that's a short-term repair.
Yeah. Do you feel like you're satisfying these objectives from your perspective?
From my perspective, yes, and again, I can only respond to what I hear and know in terms of, if it comes across my desk as a problem. I know that we dispatch the crews when we hear a pothole request, and the supervisor goes out and checks it and then schedules something.
Okay. Let me see if there's anything else.
Now, there are other issues with utility cuts, and again, if we go out and see that it's a bad utility patch, but it's not harmful, it's not going to create a traffic problem, we contact the utility, and then we bug them until they get it on their
And I know you
repair
do that,
schedule.
because Washington Gas has a habit of just showing up for no, I mean, one day they told me, oh, well, we're digging this hole in the middle of Wildwood Drive because the property owner over there hasn't paid his bill,
Cutting off the
and we
edge.
have to turn it off. And I thought, oh, gosh. So we have a hole in the middle of our street, and then, of course, they patched it, which then sunk. Okay. That's, I think, all I have for now.
Councilmember Siemens?
Thank you, Mayor, and thank you for being here with us this hour. I know that we get a lot of positive feedback about our gardens, but I'm concerned that this council has, for the last couple of years, talked about sustainability, and I see that we're again adding more gardens to the work, but not increasing staff at all. And I couple that concern with some negative feedback I've heard recently about gardens, some of them not being maintained as well as they have in the past. As a specific example, today I had someone talk to me about the thistles growing to almost to seed in Memorial Park. And I wonder if maybe we should be thinking about cutting back on the amount of work or increasing the number of people. And I would prefer to see where we could cut back on the amount of work.
Well, that would be a council decision. That would not be my recommendation. I guess anytime you have competing demands, you have to sort of decide which way you want to go with it. We do have, as I mentioned, 2 full-time equivalents in the garden division. The nature of their work, given that a lot of it has to be done spring and fall, and there's times in the winter, of course, we use our garden folks for our sidewalk clearing and snow removal and those types of things. But there's times of the year where they're less busy than others, so it's always seemed to be, in terms of staffing, it seemed to be efficient to bring in temporary seasonal work, bring in people when you need them, per se, and then not have to carry the employee year-round and keep them gainfully employed during the times where that particular job function may be less busy than others. We do have a regular schedule that the garden supervisor develops in terms of getting to each of our public spaces. There are certain spaces that they get to more often than others, like this building, for instance. It's mowed every 2 weeks during the grass growing cycle. There's other parks where they get to 4 times a year. So that's, that the range can be between, a seasonal maintenance cycle to a regular almost every 2 weeks or twice a month cycle, depending on the work being done and the nature of the building itself.
I think people have been very happy with the work that the gardener and his staff has done. But again, it seems, it makes me wonder when I see that we're adding additional gardens each year and not adding additional staff, and it makes me worry more when I'm starting to get, feedback that that people are feeling that work isn't being done that should be done. That maybe we should be looking at the workload and whether whether or not we're just asking too much from the people. And if there isn't a way to reduce the number of gardens and do an excellent job in all of them.
Well, and not as an excuse, but this was a very unusual winter. So we have some unusual conditions. Particularly, I've been talking with our gardener about Upper Portal. I hadn't been talking to him about Memorial. I know we have situations where we have certain type of weed growth that we never have at this time of year, and it's because things didn't die over the winter. So this has been kind of an interesting seasonal cycle for us through winter and spring. So to some degree, some of the maintenance issues may be because the weather was such that it got way ahead of us before we started our usual maintenance cycle. So there could be some, I don't know the specifics of Memorial Park, but there could be some situations that have been exacerbated by
Well, I
that.
certainly defer to your judgment on that, but
I mean, most of the new gardens, not all, but the ones that are proposed in fiscal year 13 are related to our stormwater bioretention facilities. And, you know,
I think those are good, but,
Yeah.
you know, the people were all busy last year, and now they're going to be doing more things.
Yeah.
So there's at some point where people are over-busy.
Sure. I absolutely am right there with you, and I wouldn't want to say otherwise. We are, we're definitely pushing
Either that or you
our staff to-
over-budgeted last year. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah. We are pushing our staff to continue a high-performance level.
Or maybe she'd like the gas-powered blowers back.
Barb, I have a question that's related to the Public Works, and that is the display of the U.S. flag. And I wonder, what is our situation on that now?
Daryl can correct me if I'm wrong. Daryl and I had talked about, I think there was some email correspondence with the council, I don't know, several months ago. The protocol is that a flag should only fly 24 hours a day if it is lit. So we did have a situation where there was some, I guess, over on the library side, which is what Daryl was talking about earlier, there would need to be some work done in order to light it. And I think there was a repair that was needed over at Memorial Park. When that issue came up, what Daryl and I had talked about, and I think I'd shared with the council, was that my immediate focus was to get lighting back installed over at Memorial Park so the flag could be put back up. I think because of the proximity of the two parks, and especially at the time we were looking at spending close to $8,000 to get, lighting to one of the library grounds, given the proximity, at least the council email exchanges at that time, there did not seem to be a majority of the council who felt the need to spend $8,000 to install lighting on the library flagpole, which if it is not lit, I would be very reluctant to have a flag that required being taken up and down every single day, because the reality is I think we may struggle to do that as a staff, and I don't want to offend anybody by not following appropriate flag protocol.
I don't recall a thing coming to us asking about the $8,000.
It was
I remember a
it was
discussion.
quite a while ago.
I remember the discussion about that possibly it could be done in conjunction with the lighting on the bridge out here. Anyways, I wonder if it wouldn't be appropriate to just do the flagpole in front of the building at the bridge and take advantage of the lighting at that location and have a more prominently displayed flag. I think it's unfortunate that our choice is at this point not to display a flag at all.
I think there's one up at Memorial now, isn't there?
I would have to look to make sure. We did have a lighting repair done on Memorial, so that it is flag ready. If a flag isn't there, it is flag ready and able to be hung 24/7.
Okay. I think it'd be good to get it resolved one way, and of course it does require still some maintenance, because there are times when the state does ask that we lower the flag to half-staff in remembrance of some of our servicemen and other individuals who were killed.
I think it depends how far you want to go. Typically, a United States flag cannot be ordered to be flown at half-staff by anyone other than an act of Congress or by the President. A governor can basically order a state flag to be flown at half-staff, which we do not fly a state flag. We only fly the United States flag.
Okay.
That's how
I'd
it
just
works.
like to see it get it resolved and fly the flag.
Councilmember Mayo.
Thank you, Mayor. Just to follow up on that issue, January 5th, we exchanged emails about the subject of two flags versus one, and there were at least emails from the mayor and myself indicating that we supported moving to one flag. but not from the rest of the council. The other discussion talked about solar power versus conventional. My questions are two more minor things and one bigger question. I'd be really interested in, I think we talked about, or I talked about this once before, in trying to figure out what the cost of the city purchasing, for example, 100 of the large 50-gallon recycling containers would be. Because I noted earlier that I believe, or at least the data suggests, that Montgomery County is now recycling at a higher rate than Tacoma Park is in terms of percent of waste being recycled. And that seems to me it eliminates the justification for, one of the justifications for us having our own service. And so I'd rather see us improve our service. And so if larger containers would result in higher recycling rates, that would be a good way to do it. The second question is, and this follows on Councilmember Siemens' line of comments, when we put in bioretention basins, do those then become city, so in a place where previously there was no garden in essence, do those become a city maintenance and our obligation? And are we doing what we can to try to have as perennial and evergreen as possible?
Yeah, and a
plans
presentation
there?
I'm going to do a little later today, you'll get firsthand views on that. We do a lot of rock. We do a lot of very
That's great. It
hardy.
doesn't grow at all.
Yeah, very hardy, sturdy plants, yeah.
Great. And third small question, in the budget we have many management objectives in each section. It's sort of my assumption, looking at those, that then I, as council member, would be able to see, are we achieving those management objectives at some point, either in a future year budget or in some other time during the year. So, 24-hour response on potholes, are we achieving that? Yes. So I'm assuming that you would track that, but if that's not what those objectives are for, then I just need to be educated on why they're there. And my last and sort of biggest question that for which I will go back to the answer probably numerous times throughout the year is, are we sure we have the staffing in this budget to handle all the projects that we need? Because I know that already in my time in council we've come up with to limits. And so I'm just noting in the budget we have the major greenscaping on Flower Avenue. That's a really big project. We have all the ADA compliance, $600,000 proposed in funding for this year. I'm assuming we have money obligated from last year that we'll still be, or this current year that we'll still be spending. We've got some new sidewalk projects going in, a whole host of other things that I'm not listing. And I just want to make sure that we don't get to a point in the year where we're not able to spend the money we budgeted because we don't have the staff to do it. So we should always have the money in the budget to get the money in the budget and staffing to get the money we have in the budget for projects spent.
And I'm going to look to Daryl. Obviously, this is her shop, and she's probably the best person who can answer that.
Well, as we go through this budget process, we do our best guess. Some of it are our own design projects that we've had in the works for years, so we know when they're coming up. So we know what we have intended to do for the year. And barring any change on the part of change in direction, I will remind you that last year we were going full steam on ADA until I got stopped. So I had $300,000 to spend that I wasn't able to spend because I was directed not to. So providing that there isn't a change in, mid-course correction in terms of the work that's being done, and coming up with a budget and my discussions with the city manager, I feel fairly confident that the projects that we've identified, stormwater projects, the design projects that we know, the construction projects that we know, our street work and whatnot, can be managed with the staffing level that we envision for FY13. That's not to say that all those things will get done. If my crystal ball is right and the projects proceed as we've designed them, we'll be able to get those done with the staffing level we have now. One of the things that's a challenge for us is if things get added to the mix mid-year, because we haven't planned for them, we haven't staffed for them, we have a whole kind of calendar set up from before the year even starts about when we're going to do certain projects. We kind of plan, what's a fall project, what's a winter project, spring, so on. So to the degree that we know what's going to be coming down the pike, and some things you just don't know, we can plan for those. So based on what I know of what we're anticipating doing, the projects that we've got listed in our budget, I think the staffing level, particularly with the special projects coordinator, will be able to oversee and maintain those projects. If additional things come in or change, then that's when we go back to the council and say, which one of these things that we had on the list do you not want us to do? So there will be those kind of mid-course corrections, but...
If I may just add something to what Darrell said, and I'm not asking the council for a yes or no this evening, but one of the things I was hoping when you get into the reconciliation process, or even if you're comfortable this evening, with the proposed new position, my preference would be to be able to start advertising for that at the earliest opportunity, and if the council would be comfortable giving me the appropriate authorization to do so, I wouldn't mind getting an ad out on the street sooner rather than later, in the hopes that we would go through the recruitment process and maybe actually have somebody hired and on board for these new positions July 1st, as opposed to kind of waiting until almost June 1st before we're in a position to advertise. So I'm not asking for that authorization this evening, but that is something I intended to bring up once you've concluded your budget deliberations and I have a sense of whether or not there's approval for these new positions or not.
Councilmember Daniels-Cohen.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Braithwaite, for all this hard work. Quick question, and it's probably been answered on Monday, but I noticed one more time all of the employee recognition is gone, and is that because everything goes to the affair, I guess I'll call it, that you have in the...
No, what you will see in the individual departmental budgets is employees who are reaching milestones in their employment with the city. So these are the awards that are 5, 10, 15, 20, 25 years, where they will get a monetary payment, or a gift card, actually. So it will only show up when you have employees who are going to hit those milestones, and that's obviously going to change from year to year. So what we do, Councilmember Daniels-Cohen, in putting together the budget, is I literally look at anniversary dates for employees and who will be hitting those milestones.
Thank you. Because I think they really do a good job. They do. Public Works are my pals, and they do a great job, always. Always answering the call.
Okay, I've got a couple quick ones before I go back around to two colleagues who have additional questions, but I think mine can go pretty quickly. On 61, you talk about street sweeping, and I think it was last year, budget time, we talked about notification to let people know when their streets are going to be swept so we have better compliance with moving vehicles. Have we made progress on that?
We are waiting for the new website to be able to put that information up. The current website doesn't work itself very well to showing of maps and things like that. So right now, there's nothing changed other than the general information we've given out to the listserv folks or community organizations, where we tell them what day of the week their neighborhood is swept on. Okay. It's one of 5 days, and we have five zones between March and October.
Yep. Okay. I was looking for that because I know my street is Tuesday, but I'm never sure which Tuesday.
Oh, okay. Right. Well, and that will remain the same. Our goal is to get there twice a month. Mm-hmm. And we usually start in March. This year, again, we were sweeping streets in January. It's just a very unusual year.
But will you be able to put on the website kind of, if all holds true, you'll get the second and fourth or the first and third, or?
We would prefer not to, because there's so many variables in terms of weather, in terms of breakdown, in terms of staffing, that it's...
And it's a simpler message to just say, assume.
Yeah, just assume, every Tuesday move your car, and 2 of those 4, the sweeper will go through.
Okay. You mentioned something on 63 about various things that we're promoting drop-off for additional recyclable items, and you don't mention batteries. Are all batteries now trash?
Yeah, the county no longer accepts batteries in their hazardous waste drop-off. The alkaline batteries have been remanufactured, and if you want to get into the nitty-gritty of this, Montgomery County's website has copious amounts of information about the change that's been made in manufacturing. So alkaline batteries are no longer need to be separated out from the regular trash. Rechargeable batteries are different, and the button batteries, they still encourage people to take those back, usually to the point of sale or a place like a drugstore or something like that that has the collection containers on the counter for those. But regular alkaline batteries that you purchase over the counter today do not need to be separated out, and there is no place for them. There is no market for them anymore.
Okay. Status on the green roof, since that's a garden?
Our green roof?
Yes?
Needs some plants. We've lost some over that mild winter. I don't know, maybe a fungus. I'm not sure what you would think of anything that would have thrived. So we'll be doing some additional supplemental planting of the roof, but otherwise it's functioning quite well in its current capacity.
Okay, good. And the final thing, which is just an observation, on page 113 in the CIP, you have an item for an out year for Eastern and Tulip. And I thought, they don't intersect. So I don't
It
know.
could be two, I don't know.
I don't know what that is, but if you can
It'll be in the
figure out what it
stormwater.
is.
It's two separate. Yeah, two projects.
Which page?
$30,000 in
113.
FY16, a stormwater project? That says Eastern and,
Fourth from the bottom.
Fourth one from the bottom,
I've
Eastern
got
and
Ritchie
Tulip.
Avenue. Must be somewhere different. Oh, here we go. Eastern and Tulip, yeah, it's probably two, but I'll check and confirm on
Okay,
that.
just nothing imminent, but it caught my eye. And we'll go back to Councilmember Snipper.
Quick question. I forgot to ask this. The gas-powered leaf blowers for doing the, remember we prohibited them for doing for the city using them? And at the time, there was some concern about some staffing issues, and some of the staff had some other concerns. I was wondering if you'd describe what our experience has been so far.
It's been mildly problematic from a maintenance point of view, particularly with leaf removal in the gardens. We currently have in our equipment list some battery-powered blowers that the staff use, and you'll see them both on the mowing crew as well as in the garden crew. They don't have the power that the gasoline-powered blowers do, so they aren't as useful as those were. We're hoping that, the development of those types of equipment continues to improve. But it is a point of, mild contention on the part of the staff. They've worked their way around it, and we have to spend a little more time in some functions than we would have otherwise had to with the blowers themselves. But we have been using the alternatives, and to a limited degree, they do most of what we need them to do, but not all.
Okay, great, thank you.
Councilmember Schultz.
In your budget for, I forget which it is, which division it is, do you show an allocation of funds for the Department of Public Works' responsibility for cleaning up after special events in the city, like the 4th of July parade, the street festival and all of that, which...
Largely gets reflected in our overtime budget, because most of those things are done on overtime. So we develop an overtime budget that includes a certain number of hours for a certain number of people for each of the events that we're aware of.
I guess these special events are, really important things to our community. And now we're talking about, another one, a possible, a world festival. Nobody even has a good idea of the concept, much more than the concept of what its scope would be. But it seems like it would be helpful at some point, maybe not in the budget session, to get a breakout of what those costs are for the Department of Public Works, so that we all can better appreciate the consequences of these events. We all love to have them, but there are fiscal consequences to our budget, and they may not be significant, or they may be, but I just think at some point they need to be pulled out of the budget so that we can at least recognize what those amount to. And of course, we'd say the same thing for the police department.
Yeah, I can go back through old emails. We've talked about this in past budget sessions, and I'd have to go back and, I think excluding the World Festival, because that wasn't on the table at the time.
Right.
And not counting any staff work that may be done during the regular workday. We're just talking kind of overtime cost or barricades and things of that nature. I think it was running in the neighborhood for all departments, Councilmember Schultz, between $30,000 and $40,000
A year?
a year.
Okay. For this department or for the city in general?
I think it was for the city in general,
Yeah,
it's right
police
around
and public.
40,000.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you. What are the prospects of the city being able to move forward with a compostable collection program in the next fiscal year?
It is entirely dependent on this point of getting a licensed facility within a close enough proximity that it's economically viable for us. So we're still waiting for a processing facility to open up and be licensed so that we can use it. We're still hoping that the University of the District of Columbia facility, coordinated with Growing Soul and another organization that's planning that, it's still in the works, but they're moving on a slower pace than they originally envisioned.
What would be the cost of running a pilot, say the monthly cost of running a pilot program once you are able to start? And is that a displaced cost or an additional one?
I've run some figures before, and I can't pull them up to mind. We were assuming a pilot program of about 1,000 households. Again, assuming not 100%, you wouldn't get 100% participation each time, but we were going to use existing staff on an existing Monday route with a supplemental truck that we have to do the collection. So we weren't envisioning additional costs staffing-wise to run the pilot program. There may be some modest overtime costs in the event that there's a delay or getting the vehicle to the collection facility, but that's one of the factors of having one within a reasonable distance of our city. So at this point, the pilot costs were largely going to be related to advertising, whether or not we gave promotional materials to those folks that participated in the pilot, whether we gave kitchen-side containers or compostable plastic bags. Kind of the add-ons to the program would be where the cost centers were, but the staffing and the equipment, obviously some additional fuel costs were going to be absorbed in the existing solid waste budget.
All right. The second question. There are a number of locations where residents are likely to request evaluation of traffic calming measures, and you've indicated in another occasion, you indicated that this is not a capability that city staff has anymore, that you'd contract out this service. Mm-hmm. What about money for that? I'm referring specifically to requests of the 7,200 to 7,400 block of Maple Avenue, and then potentially there'd be some need in Tacoma Junction in the coming year.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Those costs that we have allocated are currently in the CIP through the Speed Camera Fund. There's an allocation for traffic calming together with sidewalk design and construction. So that $400,000, I believe, is kind of a catch-all category for new sidewalk requests, construction of existing sidewalks that have been designed, and any traffic calming requests that come in.
So exploratory work could be included in the CIP?
Yes.
Okay, I hadn't understood that.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and we have 3 engineering firms on contract that we use on a rotating basis.
Okay, I think we have reached a point where we should take a break. I know there's CIP, but I think we're going to take a break. We'll be back.
I'm here. Oh, next session.
Yes.
So that we can get out of here in a decent hour. She had her coffee beforehand. She's all ready.
I'm falling off of it.
I incorporated my CIP items in my questions. Did other people need to go through the CIP?
I only think Daryl and I were just talking during the break. I mean, I think if you've had an opportunity to look at the CIP, most of the items are kind of routine equipment, vehicle replacement. Probably the only thing as far as non-stormwater related projects that is worth noting is the Flower Avenue Green Street project. think Daryl will be opening bids tomorrow. Obviously, one of the complications is that we need to get the MOU in place with the State Highway Administration, because Daryl's not in a position to award a bid until that transaction is done and we have secured funding for the project. Anything else, Daryl, that you wanted to talk about?
No, and this bid, of course, is just for development, design development.
Okay, so we'll go to the watershed implementation plan.
All right. We had hoped to give this presentation to the council a while back, but for a variety of reasons, couldn't get to it until now, so I will try to get through it quickly. But basically, I wanted to make sure that we were all on, had a shared level of understanding about the amount of work that's been taking place in the city since 2006 to meet our stormwater requirements. Anyway, as many of you know, all Bay jurisdictions were required to submit a watershed implementation plan. We submitted ours to the state of Maryland on November 18th of last year. In that plan, it identifies how we plan to meet the requirements of the Clean Water Act and the EPA's Chesapeake Bay program. Our basic primary plan for implementation is to add additional stormwater management best practices and continue programs that provide restoration credits that I'll explain in a minute. Just for starters, some definitions. When you hear the word TMDL, or total maximum daily load, that's the maximum amount of a pollution that can be received by a body of water and still meet the standards. BMP is another acronym you hear. It's best management practice. That's a level of required to achieve your results. Primarily, for our purposes, it's pollution reduction or water quality treatment. The EPA has established TMDLs for the Chesapeake Bay watershed. Those TMDLs were established at the end of 2010. The EPA is requiring jurisdictions to achieve 60% of the TMDLs by 2017 and full compliance by 2025. Those dates have been changed a bit since the initial submission. They've relaxed somewhat. Originally, the full compliance date was 2020, and the original 2017 requirement was for 70%. The TMDLs, the limits that are established in our area, are for nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment levels. The implementation, as is being done now through EPA and the state, is done on a watershed level, and the TMDLs have been established for counties. So municipalities haven't been given an actual allocation as of yet. We're still focused on the county level and the watershed level. And I've got some information in the appendix that addresses some of this. Lastly, the city's compliance program is based on our strategy to establish best management practices to treat runoff from 20% of the existing impervious area within the city. So what we need to do. The total city area is a little less than 1,300 acres. The amount of impervious surface that we have in the city is just under 400 acres, and you see there how it's divided out between roads and buildings, parking lots, and sidewalks. To meet a 20% goal, the city must establish best management practices for a total of 79 acres. So here's where we are so far just by numbers. Since 2006, numerous stormwater best management practices have been implemented, and these are both ones that have been done on the public space as well as ones that have been done through permits. We have the council approved and state accepted our improvements to our stormwater permitting process, so those requirements now set standards higher than they used to for best management practices on stormwater controls on private development. So since 2006, we've managed to achieve a retrofit for best management practices on 14 acres in the city. Additionally, we have implemented other programs that provide us credit towards restoration. They include our street sweeping program, which gives us a credit of 5 acres, our stream restoration stabilization work, which gives us 6 acres equivalent, and our tree planting program, which gives us 2 acres equivalent. So far we've got 14 acres since 2006 of impervious area that's now treated with best management practices. 13 acres that are treated based on the alternative restoration credit. So together they total 27 acres that have received treatment to date of the 79 that are required. Based on our work history since 2006, we see that we've got an average rate of treatment of about 5 acres a year. About 3 acres of those are for best management practices, 1 acre for stream restoration, and 1 acre of reforestation. And you'll see shortly some of those projects, and I'll be able to show them through a photo slides. So what we're assuming, based on our past record and the projects that we've identified, we're estimating that we're going to be able to treat total acres by 2017 of 57 acres. That includes the 27 we've already done so far, plus an additional 30 acres in those pending. These numbers were developed from 2011, so this pending 5 years. So that actually means that we'll be treating 72% of the required 60% that's mandated by the state. And by 2025, based on our assumptions about our ability to implement programs, we'll be treating 97 acres, or more than 100% of what we're required to treat. So the bottom line for us is that the city expects to exceed the requirements for implementing those BMPs for both the 2017 deadline as well as the 2025 deadline. The following slides contain some photos and brief descriptions of some of the projects that we've worked on since 2006. They break down into sort of 3 categories: the bioretention areas, which we've spoken some about tonight, stream bank stabilization, and other methods that we're using to improve water quality. Some of you may remember the work that we did on the bridge repairs. Due to the nature of the erosion along the piers themselves, this qualified as a stream restoration. These repairs were undertaken through the direction of the city engineer, with the county sharing 50% of the cost of those repairs. And again, as I mentioned, they addressed spalling concrete of the beams, the abutments, and the decks. Undermined piers. We also waterproofed and resurfaced the bridge and rebuilt the pedestrian pathway on the Maple Avenue Bridge. Our first project with Friends of Sligo Creek was in Forest Park. The Friends of Sligo Creek developed the design and enlisted volunteers to build 2 rain gardens. The county provided educational signage for one of the rain gardens. And in particular, this area was challenging to work in due to the large number of trees and very compacted soils, given that it's a playground. So a lot of activity, a lot of feet. We were limited. What you'll see in some of the following slides is when we do a bioretention basin, we're digging 3 or 4 feet into the ground. You couldn't do that here because of the trees and the surroundings. So we basically created surface level rain gardens by building the soil up versus going down. This project just recently had a volunteer effort work on it and has greatly improved the appearance of the 2 rain gardens there, and it's working quite well. Mississippi Avenue stream bank stabilization was a serious erosion problem that we had. Runoff from the street had actually eroded the slope and was undermining the pavement. So we ended up designing a repair that constructed an imbricated stone wall to restore the slope and also stabilize the stream bed. We actually had to do a pump around of the stream bed, and we created cross vein structures within the stream bed itself to limit the impact of torrent rainwater coming through the area. So if you ever get a chance to peer over Mississippi Avenue as you're driving down, you'll see a much improved view of things from that side. Cleveland Avenue project is really one of our banner projects and one that the city engineer is quite proud of. This was a situation where there was no stormwater infrastructure on this tiny 1-block street. In order to put in stormwater structure, it would have required over 1,000 feet of drain pipe that would have had to go through the backyards of private property down to Piney Branch Road and connect to the stormwater pipe under Piney Branch Road. Clearly a very invasive, very costly engineer's dream of a project if you want to dig deep pipes and really get into earth moving. So what we were able to develop through the help of some incredible design engineers was to take a look at creating under the street storage area for stormwater. So if you see in that first picture with the city car in it, that's kind of the before. The bottom picture on the right is the after. So we created a permeable pavement of pavers at the bottom of the street, and a 4-foot of underground storage chambers with plastic kind of egg carton things surrounded by gravel and wrapped in filter fabric that reside under the street. So they store the water. There's also water storage chambers under the sidewalk on the side, and there's permeable concrete in the sidewalk on the side. In addition to the storage chamber under the street, we also constructed a rain garden at the end of the street, because clearly you're still going to have surface flow that runs down the street and into 2 private properties. So we created a quite large rain garden that captured whatever runoff flowed through it, as well as a trench drain at the bottom of the street, and the drainage pipes from the underground chambers themselves fed into that rain garden. And that's been a project where we routinely sweep the street to keep the sediment load off the street. The private property owners agreed to maintain and does all the weeding and maintenance of the rain garden that's located on her lot. And based on everything we've seen so far, the project has worked very well, and I'm really quite proud of how that turned out. This was our first bioretention basin at the intersection of Grant Avenue and Holly Avenue, as we were doing a sidewalk project here and walking around with some of the neighbors. This was one of our Safe Routes to School sidewalk projects. Somebody said, hey, can you get rid of some of this pavement? It's just asphalt city here. So that sort of got the cogs rolling. What you'll see there is we excavated a large portion of pavement, dug down 4 feet, put filter fabric, stone, and then did a landscaping plan on top with very drought resistant as well as water loving plants that can take an extreme in both directions. This was all located right in front of a stormwater inlet, so there's the existing structure there. What we basically did is create a pre-filter so that any street water, and if you've been at that intersection, there's a lot of pavement all around there, so the street water flows down, and the curb line has been eliminated in several of the places, so the water flows directly into that bioretention basin and then filters through the plants and the sediment, the bioretention soils, before it gets into the stormwater system itself.
Joe, can I just interrupt you for 1 second? While we're looking at that project, is that something that counts as a quarter acre, half acre? How does that relate back
let's
to
see. The
roads?
drainage acre for that area was 1.2 acres. Of that, 0.23 acres was impervious.
Okay, so that's how it counts with the earlier mentioned.
Glengarry Avenue erosion control. The 2 photos you see there, one is taken at the dead end of Heather Avenue looking down, the one with the guardrail in it. The other is taken from Sligo Creek Parkway looking up. We had quite a bit of erosion problem in that area due to just the nature of the way it was designed. There was a curb line that was put down Heather Avenue as if Heather Avenue would have continued and been paved, but it wasn't. The road had been stopped. This was before my time, so I don't know the history there. But we created a swale to capture the water from the paved area on Heather Avenue. And because of the great gradient and slope there, water was coursing down either on the pavement itself or right along the edge of the pavement in the street and eroding the soils, and that washes right across Sligo Creek Parkway into Sligo Creek itself. So through this retention basin, there's a pipe opening right at the end of that riprap stone at the end at Sligo Creek Parkway. Basically, we've stabilized the soil, and we've created a way for the water from the pavement to filter before it gets into Sligo Creek Parkway. That has a drainage area of 2 acres, 0.8 of which are impervious. The Linden Avenue retaining wall, I wanted to show you some pictures there, so I couldn't put any words on the slides. I don't know if any of you saw this before, but it was really a nightmare. We had right there on Linden Avenue, which is a dead end that abuts Sligo Creek, there's a large apartment building, the Hillwood Manor apartment buildings, garden apartments there. There was a very large 150-foot long, 15 feet high retaining wall that was collapsing. In addition to that, there was a stormwater inlet, which you see in one of those pictures, that had totally collapsed and eroded. So the soils had washed away from the pipes had fallen and broken because the soil had washed away. And again, as you see in that first picture there on the left, the discharge comes out of the retaining wall and runs straight into Sligo Creek. And the concrete swale that had previously been constructed there had been eroded and broken up and was basically gone. So what we were able to do is the project was designed, and we were successful in getting a grant from the Maryland Department of the Environment. The retaining wall was built The pictures really don't show it justice, but it's now a lovely area at this dead end where the retaining wall has some architectural features, as well as it's a lovely place to just go hang out and look at the creek, which you never would have wanted to walk up to that other retaining wall and spend any time there. In the bottom right-hand side, you see an inlet opening. That's actually a modular wetland. The inlet opening itself has some sediment baskets within the inlet that capture sediment that runs off the street. We routinely go and empty those sediment baskets. And then that green space that you see to the side of that, that's actually modular wetland that the water enters the inlet, flows through the wetland itself, and it's actually a crushed shale type filter medium that filter the water and also generate biological activity just based on the medium itself. It removes oil and grease and hydrocarbons. And then once the water is filtered through that medium, it gets discharged into the pipe that you see in that central picture. And then we've regraded the slope and created a riprap step pool that leads then down to Sligo Creek Parkway. So it's a project that was a significant one in terms of the before and after and the impact of that. That had a drainage area of about 1.34 acres, 0.98, or most of it, was impervious because it's largely a paved area around there.
What was the cost of that project?
I believe our grant was, I'm going to say $170,000. It's either $130,000 or $170,000, that project. And that's the construction portion. The city funded the design portion prior to the allocation of the grant. The community center green roof is also a project that we had funded through that same granting source of the Maryland Department of the Environment. And that's, again, on this building. I think you've most seen it and are familiar with it. That was originally conceived of during the community center development, but wasn't able to be built until later due to funding issues. Public Works, we've talked about this some too. This was pictures that show our original filter system for our inlets. On the top right-hand corner there, you see an inlet opening. That inlet is actually a large concrete structure that goes quite deep into the ground. And then in the bottom left-hand corner, you see the filters that are located. There's a total 3 layers of filters, four filters deep, that are located within that concrete structure. So the discharge from our facility, which one would call a hot spot, it's like any other mechanic or any other repair place. We have quite a bit of equipment sitting on that lot. We have gasoline and fuel tanks there. We do quite a bit of repair, so you're going to get a high level of grease, oil, sediment, hydrocarbons in general that are going to be washed off our pavement and into the inlet. So now we have this filtering system that captures their hydrophilic filters, so they don't absorb water, but they capture the discharge. They've been working very well. We open them up and rotate the filters around because you can turn them back to front and top to bottom, so you get quite a bit of use out of the filters themselves before they need to be disposed of. During the construction, we had a big sediment fence around our inlet, so it wasn't being used, and became a home for a family of raccoons that apparently find those filters very tasty. The entire top row of our filters were chewed away by some furry friends. They have since moved along, and I imagine they have 3 heads or 14 toes or something else because they ate a lot of very, very nasty stuff.
It's interesting, it is.
In terms of the new Public Works facility, in addition to that one inlet filter, we also have a second filter located on the opposite side of the yard. But the photo here addresses our rainwater harvesting system. So we capture about 95% of the runoff from that roof. That's the sanitation storage building, and it enters a 4,000-gallon tank where it can be used to water our nursery. We have a outlet spigot at one of the buildings that's directly fed from the tank. It can also, together with the gray water system, be used to flush our toilets once that system gets put into place. And the downspouts you see there are these special vortex filters where the water comes down the downspout, and because of the design of the filter itself, it sort of discharges the initial 5% of discharge. You want to get kind of that first flush, which is considered to have, sediment, bird poop, what have you, out of there, so you don't want that in your rainwater collection tank. And so it discharges the first flush, and the rest of the water proceeds into the rainwater harvesting tank. Fred's very familiar with this project. It has evolved over time. This is a traffic calming measure that has a water treatment feature. It's a 36-foot wide roundabout with an 800 square foot bioretention garden in the center. This has been a development over time. We continue to sort of tweak and work it to try to increase or decrease the amount of time that water actually stands on the street at the inlet opening. The unique feature of this, in addition to removing a great amount of asphalt by its development, is there's very little slope on this street. So you've got less than 2% slope from one end to the other. And our stormwater inlet, which captures the water eventually, is way 100, 150 feet down the road. So rather than dig up the pavement and put a pipe in, we're depending on surface flow. So the water has to come into the rainwater capture bio area through this front inlet, and then it gets filtered in this large bioretention area. There's plants and sediment there as well. The sediment settle out, and then the water discharges through the back end. It's a very effective at what it does. You can kind of watch it work. And the amount of sediment that you see in that bioretention area is kind of testament to what it's capturing from the street. We're going to be doing some additional work to try to open that intake area so that the water from the street filters more quickly into the bioretention area. And that has a drainage area of about 2.67 acres, about half of which is impervious. This building, we put in 2 bioretention facilities, one at the entrance of the parking lot on the Philadelphia Avenue side. We had an area where we had striped for no parking. That was asphalt, so we just opened that up. Again, that's right in front of an inlet, so very similar to what we did at Grant and Holly. We just created a deep basin and then put in the right type of biosoils and ran the gutter pan along it so the water would flow into that bioretention area before it went into the inlet itself. The larger facility is back behind the Computer Learning Center. I don't know if any of you remember what it used to look like back there. Before there was even a building, there used to be a large inlet and the road went straight through. Well, when the road stopped and the building was plopped down, we still kept our inlet. We had enormous problems with flooding as a result of that inlet clogging, just because the amount of discharge of leaves and debris and pine needles and whatnot from the area surrounding the parking lot. So this was actually a twofold solution. It provided us a way to filter our parking lot discharge, as well as eliminated the problem we were having of clogging and flooding of that inlet. So now it's become a real focal point of the back of the building there, and improved the functionality as well as the appearance.
Did it also solve the flooding of the library?
Yes, no more flooding in the library through those back doors. This was a project that was really a great project to work on. The neighborhood was totally invested and involved in the development, encouragement, and working out of this project. Through the Natural Resources Design Group and the neighborhood, we developed a solution to a problem. It's actually a budding Maryland National Capital Park and Planning parkland at Opal Daniels Park. Our street at Hancock and Sheridan dead ends right in front of this area, so there's quite a bit drainage area of 3.4 acres, a lot of paved area and houses in that area that discharge water onto the street. The water then flowed right out of this 18-inch pipe down a unstable slope into an area that then goes down along Lincoln Avenue there, close to Maple Avenue. So what was designed there was a twofold project, one of which was to first capture the rainwater from the initial flush into a large rain garden that's set off to the left of that swale. So that's where the water comes through initially and filters into the rain garden. There's a piping system that channels the water after it's filtered down through the rain garden out into the slope on the side. For heavier rains, or where you have higher quantities of water, or where the rain garden itself fills up, the water can then continue down that sluiceway, if you will, And then there's a series of Riverstone step pools that the water can wash down in. We had to do quite a bit of evaluation before we were able to construct this. It was quite clear that the slope was not natural. It had been a fill, and so we had to make sure that the fill itself was stable enough to handle the additional water. So we did some testing, some infiltration and some sediment testing and some coring, and turns out it was substantial enough to do what we needed to do. So there's actually a sand filter underneath that step pool stone. So we dug it out a little deeper, created a sand filter, and the river stones are above that. So when the water drops down into the step pools, it not only slows it down and drops out some of the sediment and other types of pollution, it can then filter down through into the sand filter as it makes its way down the slope and to the area. There's a lot of other erosion that's happening outside of this area, but we're hoping that Park and Planning will see this as a model that they can emulate there. And hundreds of hours were put in by the neighborhood volunteers in planting, maintaining, weeding, and assisting us in keeping that project going. This was a project that we did in collaboration with Art for the People and the Old Town Business Association. It was one of those really quite simple and very effective feel-good projects. The art project with the tile was such a successful project, and people wanted to do more, and so they developed these ways for people to build the tiles, and then they needed to find a place for them. This is a city right-of-way adjacent to a retaining wall parking lot, fairly unattractive. Has a lot of water leakage problems through the wall. So what we did was cut out 2 feet of the sidewalk alongside that building and dig down 2 or 3 feet to create a little mini bio swale down the side of that building. Rain garden plants were planted along in that swale, and then the artistic features were added to the building, which has really sort of transformed what was a very unattractive area. So it has both an artistic function as well as a water filtering function. The parking lot above drains down the driveway and then just sweeps around, and a great deal of that is captured in the swale. At the bottom of the picture there, you can see the discharge pipe that comes through the sidewalk and out to the curb. So water that runs through the bioretention swale then makes its way back out to the street and eventually into our storm system. This was a bioretention basin that we just recently finished on Old Carroll Avenue. We have the paving yet to do of Old Carroll. That's one of the streets that we'll be paving this fiscal year. But it was an area where we've done a lot of pipe work. We had a lot of collapsed pipes that we worked on under the area. So this was a way that we put a cut in through the curb. We'll be regrading when we pave the street so that it's running right into that opening. And there's a large bioswale created 3 feet deep underneath that with a rock surface, as well as appropriate native plants planted on top that just kind of transforms the right-of-way there and serves the purpose of bioretention. It's got a drainage area about 2.6 acres, 0.2 of which is impervious. Another project that we just recently completed, and it was an environmental disaster out there on Wabash Avenue. Again, a dead-end street that ends right on the other side of Sligo Creek Parkway, so anything that's running down this area is ending up in Sligo Creek Parkway. There were 3 existing inlets in that area, a great deal of surface erosion. I've taken some pictures, but it really can't capture what it was out there. There was a little path that was so heavily used by walkers, bikers, ladies with baby strollers to get up back and forth to Sligo Creek from the neighborhood. So the pathway was eroding just based on all the surface water that was running off the street because of the slope. So what we were able to do there is at each of the 2 inlets on either side of the driveway as you're entering down at Wabash and Roanoke and Eastridge Avenue, where the 3 of those come together, we indented the curb into the street and dug out the area in front of the inlets and created a bioretention basin for water to flow into. The garden division is just starting to plant this area, so if you want to see what it looks like next, another week or so, they should have it done. They worked on it the day before yesterday. Weren't able to work on it with the rain yesterday, and they should be back to it again tomorrow. So we basically got the structure in place, and now the plants will be added. There's also another bioretention basin just down below those two that you see there in the picture, that basically whatever is captured in the first two and runs down that asphalt driveway is going to be captured by the third. And then we've rebuilt a great, significant portion of the trail so that we've created a safe, flat surface.
Were you able to repair the trail?
Yes, we repaired the trail down to where most of the worst erosion had taken place. We didn't go all the way down to Sligo Creek Parkway, but we went about a third of the way down. So there's a new, wider trail off the end of that path. I don't have the calculations for how much drainage and impervious area there was, but city engineer will get that, and we can add it to the slide. Just one of the things that I'd mentioned earlier is our tree planting program provides us with alternative restoration credits. And I know the city arborist has mentioned this before, but I just, wanted to restate it again. We have a very intensive program where we use the GIS to identify the trees that we have planted on the right-of-way by year, where they are, and then can track them as they get removed or added to. So we have quite a database of existing city right-of-way tree canopy, and as the arborist makes decisions about where to plant from year to year, he uses this database to assist with his decisions. And then lastly, I think most of you know, we do have a GIS database for our storm system, so we know where the pipes are, where the inlets are, what the sizes are, where they discharge. And as we're designing projects or looking at areas where we have erosion or other problems, we follow the system back to try to identify where are the most effective places where we might create best management practices within our existing system. One of the things you've seen so far is the bioretention basins, which we will continue to implement. Kind of the next phase that we need to get into, which might not provide a water quality improvement, but we've got a great deal of our infrastructure that was basically, if you think about 100 years ago where these storm pipes went, they went where the creeks and streams were, and then they filled them in. And so a lot of these are right under people's houses, not an ideal location for your infrastructure system. So in places where we can, we'd like to take them out to the right-of-way versus crossing private property lines. So there may be opportunities that avail themselves when we're doing those types of improvements. And some of the improvements we have listed on our CIP list in the out years involve relocating pipes, and where we say that, this is kind of what we're addressing. Some of what we're planning for next year, we mentioned the Sligo Mill, Poplar Mill trash interceptor. This is the large outfall, which if you haven't ever seen it, this discharges everything from D.C. as well as the southern part of the city. Massive trenches that you can stand in, our stormwater structures, discharge into this location. As you can imagine, quite a bit of trash and debris come down there, and there have been trash counts related to the Anacostia watershed, which identify this as just a trash hotspot. So what we're hoping to implement, if we get the approval of Park and Planning, and we've had a basic concept design developed by a firm that we've done a lot of work with, is to create a trash interceptor, which is these net bags that sit just outside the main water flow, and the water goes through it, and any plastic bottles, pieces of trash get captured in it, and then you routinely empty them and clean them, and then the water can continue to flow through. There's also a private property owner that's going to demo the house that's directly adjacent to this on Poplar Avenue. We've been talking to him. As you can see in that picture, there's a great deal of erosion taking place on the concrete side of that swale. So while the house is down and he's under construction, we're going to go in there and backfill and restore the substructure to that concrete swale. So we'll be making some improvements immediately in that area, as well as our trash interceptor in the future. And at Hudson Avenue, this is a project similar to what I explained on Wabash, where we've got a dead-end street sloping right into Sligo Creek Parkway, where we get a great deal of flow that overwhelms the system, creates erosion down the bank. So we're going to go in, remove some pavement, create a bioretention area, improve the erosion, and stabilize the soils on the backside of it, and create a garden, planted bioretention garden area out front. Again, this is probably something that's not good for after 10 o'clock at night, but this is Montgomery County's allocation for nitrogen loads, and the second sheet is phosphorus loads. But if you look at that first chart, countywide, it identifies what the load requirements are for agriculture, urban, septic, forest, and wastewater. And then if you look directly below that, it breaks out the urban into the amount that has to be handled by the county and the amount that they allocate to municipalities. So that's the closest you get to our contribution towards the nitrogen load levels and what we'll be needing to do. And then the same slide is available for phosphorus. We'll have this on the city's website so people can take a harder look at it. I've also provided the link to where this information is housed on the state website. So there's a vast amount of information about the watershed improvement plans and the TMDL allocations for those that want to dig in deeper. So that is in a nutshell what I was hoping to present, just to let you know a picture of where we are and where we're going, and we feel quite confident we'll be able to meet and in fact exceed the requirements for our jurisdiction. And that is it.
Thank you, that was very helpful. I've been waiting to see that for years. Any questions or comments?
I will just also say that I've held off putting the watershed implementation plan report that we've provided to the state, but we'll now post that on the website as well. We wanted to give some general information to the council before we made that information available, so that will also be listed on the city's website.
Good. This is the kind of stuff that more than one of us up here gets neck deep into.
When you say that it'll be put on the city's website, will that be, you're waiting until the new website is ready, do you think?
I imagine the WIP that we presented to or that we provided to the state is a PDF that we can provide on the existing website, and this will be as well as attached as a council document, so it will be on the current website.
Oh, okay.
Good. Thank you, very helpful.
Yes.
And it's good to see the breadth of the types of projects that we've already done, and we look forward to seeing more. And I think it's good for everybody to see this, because if they think, well, gee, what's the city doing environmentally? There's a lot here.
Well, this is all funded by the stormwater utility fee, so the 48 are now hopefully $55. This is what it's going towards.
Dollars at work.
I still think that one of the challenges is trying to help the general public or residents to understand what we're doing and sort of to appreciate it, because I know that that site you showed in my ward at Kirkland and Kennewick, I received all kinds of critical complaints because it's ugly, their trash collects there, which of course it's supposed to collect, so that it doesn't go down the storm drains. That water backs up, and I've been trying to sort of, say, give it a while for the plants to mature and to help people understand. They don't understand. They just think they just don't understand what it is.
There's absolutely need for that. I know whenever we create these, people say, there's water standing there for like a whole day afterwards. And you go, yep, that's what it's supposed to do.
That's right,
That's good.
exactly.
Yeah.
So,
Glad to know it's working.
Yeah.
So now you can point them to this.
yeah, well, I will.
And there's been newsletter article on this?
Ali has done several articles on many of these projects, primarily Cleveland Avenue, Linden Avenue. Some of the bigger projects have been detailed in
It
the
might be good
city's
to put an
newsletter.
article pointing people to this.
Yeah.
Okay. We'll move on to our last item for the evening, which is the Stormwater Fund budget.
Just about brain dead, but basically, I think we've touched around the edges of this. We've talked a bit about some of the capital projects that we have intended for this year. You have in front of you the work session cover sheet that identifies our interest in increasing the base rate from $48, which has been set at that level since 2007, to $55. A large part of that additional funding will be used to pay for the portion of additional staff time for the Special Projects Coordinator. And as I've mentioned before, this fund covers a half-time of our city engineer, as well as a portion of an administrative person who processes the stormwater permit applications, and then would now include additional staff time to bring it up to 1.15 full-time equivalents in this budget. The budget itself is broken down into funding for salaries. The word supplies doesn't quite really get it. It's consider it outside repairs. Basically, we allocate money into capital projects, which we identify as new installations. For instance, what you saw on Wabash Avenue, what we're proposing on Hudson Avenue, those are new creations, new capital projects that we'll be using that $150,000 to implement. There's another category of funding which is used for repairs, existing systems where we need to make more moderate improvements to. And you'll see that represented in that supply line, that $125,000 allocation. We're going to be doing a repair to a project on Conway and Circle Avenue, addressing some erosion issues at Cherry Avenue and Flower, and some stream bank stabilization behind Forest Park. There's also intention to start working on the Sligo Mill, Poplar Mill stream restoration project. This is envisioned more as a study, sort of an evaluation. Any of you have been through there. We have a massive amount of concrete debris that was probably developed when they, or was probably dumped when they redid New Hampshire Avenue 50 years ago. That's on the banks off of Poplar Avenue on the one side of the stream bed. Because that artificial surface is there, the concrete, the trees have grown up through it or on top of it. We're now having a lot of openings within the soil, sinkholes that are developing, trees are going to start falling. Basically, the plan is to figure out how to remove that large concrete debris and restore the original string bank. The other problem that's happening is because it's been altered on one side, the water is cutting into a very steep slope on the other side and creating an erosion problem. So until you restore the natural contour of that stream bank, you're going to continue to erode one side of the stream, and we've got this faulty surface on the other side. So we're beginning to look at how we can get that done, and if we might do that in phases or portions, or what's the best way to get that concrete removed. It will, by its nature, require the removal of the trees that have grown up and over that. So it'll be quite a project to explain to the community as to what's happening, because it will really be a marked difference in the way that appears from the street than it has before. But without that, the trees are going to start falling. We're even thinking now of putting up a fencing and keeping people off of that slope, because it's really becoming very unstable and very unsafe. Those are some of the projects that we're looking at. In the services and charges category, we do TV inspection and cleaning of 1/3 of the system every year. This includes a video camera that runs through the lines, as well as jetting of the piping themselves and the inlets themselves. We also do some in-house cleaning in addition to that, but this is basically something that we track year to year. Engineering and design services and some bank charges related to the fund itself are captured in that category.
Okay. Any questions on this? Councilmember Mayo.
Thank you, Mayor. And I apologize if we've talked about this in an earlier meeting, the motivation behind the rate change. And I think I understand this, but just to be clear, the second part of my question is the rate change also applies to non-residential property owners. It's just that the base rate is going up. So if you were the hospital, your bill would also go up by 4% on average, or whatever that is.
Right. The way the utility fee is implemented for single-family property owners, there's an assumption of a square footage of impervious area about a little over 1,200 square feet. So all single-family property owners pay that base amount. For a multifamily institution or larger property, they're actually billed based on their amount of impervious square footage divided by that 1,200, what we call equivalent residential unit. So for each equivalent residential unit, you pay $48 in the past, or now $55. So if you have more impervious surface, you'll be charged that $55 for every equivalent residential unit, every 1,200 square foot of impervious area you have on your site. So the more impervious area you have, the larger your payment will be.
I guess one of the things I don't understand is that it's roughly a $7, I mean, it looks like a 12-14% increase in the base rate, but we're not projecting a 12 to 14% increase in the fund balance. Why wouldn't the predicted revenues in the fund go up by something like the same percent as the fee goes up?
The reason for the increase partly is to pay for the new special projects person.
But the calculated revenue?
I think the question, Yolanda, is if the base fee is going up 14%, why wouldn't overall revenues go up 14%? Is that
Correct,
the question?
We can talk about it afterwards. Or
We
get back to
can,
you.
yeah. I think we'll probably need to look at, Yolanda actually did the projection for this revenue source. We'll review that, Councilmember Mail.
Okay.
Any other questions? Seeing none, I think we're just at the point where we see if there's any other general requests to the city manager or identifying any potential reconciliation items. And I'll just say one brief thing that I'll reiterate the conversation that I had with the governor's representative last night at the chapter meeting. The question after the meeting was over was, well, gee, given the timing for the state budget and the anticipation that they will come to some kind of resolution in the first half of May, maybe, how does that work with the timing for your municipal budgets, given what the potential changes could be for the county? Like basically, gee, the state has the doomsday budget. The counties have been told that they should be doing doomsday budgets. Are you doing a doomsday budget? And I said, no. We're just going to have to wait and see what happens with the state and the county and whether there's an impact, and whether there's an impact is going to come after we will have to have finished our budget, because we have to have the numbers into the county by middle to late May for billing purposes, and the county has to do the same, so it's all going to kind of come down to the end, and we're not going to be able to necessarily deal with that. Does the city manager have any sense of what, if, assuming that there is some kind of scenario where the budget picture for revenues from the state and the county changes, do we just have to wait and see, or is there any way we can plan for what we might want to anticipate, how we might want to set ourselves up for it, or is it just too much conjecture to try and deal with?
I think it's probably a little bit too much conjecture. I think as, you could develop a zillion different scenarios of what they're going to do. And even if the county suffers an impact, then what the county does with that, I think it's just another level of speculation. So I'm just concerned we just spend a lot of energy for no particular productive reason.
And that was kind of my answer to the governor's representative, but I just wanted to put that out there and say, people are thinking about this, and there are possibilities that could negatively affect us basically after we finish the budget.
And we've been down that path before.
Yes. Councilmember Grimes.
Thank you. So, money from a different perspective, thinking about all the projects that you've been describing, many of them are reliant on grant funding. I'm curious, do you have sufficient resources to apply for grants that would be beneficial for Tacoma Park projects that For instance, Councilmember Mayle has pointed out certain grant opportunities that could be applied here. Do you have sufficient resources either within Public Works or elsewhere within the city administration to go after the grants that would be of interest?
It would definitely present somewhat of a challenge. I guess my thought here on grants is that for the two projects that have been grant funded that I showed you, the Linden Avenue and the Green Roof project, those were projects that we had already designed and developed and intended to do. And we had already, they'd already been through design development, they'd been, on the table and in our capital planning project. What we were able to do by get the grants is basically not use some of the stormwater funds that we had originally intended and instead, get a lump of money in from somebody else's coffers to do it and then use that stormwater funding for something else. So in cases where where it's part of our design, where it's part of what we're doing, where it's kind of on track, the grants are less of an impact, and we try to go after them. Ritchie Avenue traffic calming, bioretention areas, we applied for a grant now twice. We're told we're on the list to get it, but if the state doesn't have money, there won't be any allocations. So, and what we've done in the past is basically if we can identify grants that help us fund what we've already got planned and developed, then we can incorporate that more easily into our work plan, and it doesn't quite have the, doesn't get anybody's knickers in a twist. The challenge that we have with running after grants, as I call it, and I don't mean it to sound that pejorative, but you find out somebody's got a pot of money and then you try to create a program to go for it, is it's not part of anything that we've been doing. We're kind of not queued up and set up to do it, and to then create a program means you either have to drop something and kind of turn and then develop the program for that. The other challenge that we have with grants is they are enormously time-consuming in terms of reporting requirements. And those two MDE grants made me swear off federal money forever and ever and ever, and I never want to do another one. It was just a nightmare of requirements. Lo and behold, MEA gave us another pot of federal money that we're now spending on the chiller and the air handler improvements, and I'm just dreading the reporting requirements that are going to come along with those fundings. So depending on the source of the funding, it can be a real challenge, particularly those that have purchasing restrictions and requirements and make us bid out differently than we would otherwise. So we've got to get educated about what the bid procurement requirements are for whatever grant source we have. So it's kind of a yes and no answer. We'd absolutely love to use grant funding and tout it when we do, but generally the way that it's easiest, for lack of a better word, is when it's part of a program that we've been developing and working on.
Yeah, I definitely agree that it's sensible to seek funding for programs that you are going to be doing anyway. Mm-hmm. I would think that there are some programs that would be in a middle ground, items that are on a wish list that are not currently scheduled, but if an opportunity to get them funded comes along, then you schedule them. So anyway, don't have any further reaction.
City Manager, have something you want to add?
I just wanted to answer Councilmember Mayle's question. There's actually three separate items that comprise total fund revenues. One is permit fees, penalties, and interest, and then there's the actual collections. The one item, which would be driven by the base fee, is exactly equivalent. It's just a mathematical calculation. There's a couple other things added in there that kind of skewed the number a little bit.
Thank you.
And Councilmember Mayle.
Thank you. I'd be really curious to know the rest of Council's interest in tolerance for putting a placeholder in the budget for a potential grant. Referring to Councilmember Grimes' comments, the National Fish and Wildlife Foundation has three grant programs actually, but a set of grant programs that are designed to do exactly what the Stormwater Chesapeake Bay program we just heard about, what we're already doing. So they have one grant program that just provides technical assistance. The money never comes to the city. The foundation hires a contractor, so there's no paperwork in the sense of managing money. And they send that contractor in to help you figure out how to optimize the projects you choose. So is a Ritchie Avenue project going to have a bigger impact at a lower cost than a Carroll Avenue project? they have experts that come in and help you figure that stuff out with, my understanding, is very low staff costs. The second piece is that they have a bigger grant program, multi-year funding, consistent for a long period of time, where they're trying to find 10 communities within the Chesapeake Bay watershed who serve as model communities who are interested in doing, in some direction. We're already a model community, in essence. We're just using our own funds to pay for it. But there's more we could do as well. And so that's a second opportunity. In all of these things, in terms of going, how much it would affect current work plans. For example, in the latter program I just talked about, I met with NIFWF staff yesterday over lunch, and you can apply for multi-year funding, and your first year can be planning and assessment. And so you have personnel costs, you have hourly costs associated with doing the planning in the first year, but in terms of project capital, hiring contractors for, gray or green infrastructure, those don't need to disrupt your project flow, and it's rather the second or third years that start coming in. So I just think, to me, it just seems like a great opportunity not to run after money, but really to get money to do an even better job of exactly what we're already doing. And that's why it's to me, it's such a compelling opportunity. So I'm just curious I don't know the process in terms of reconciliation, and I don't know the way in which we have put grant funds in programs before, but to the extent that there's any interest in that.
I would certainly be interested in learning more about that and determining whether it fits in and what the costs are going to be. It sounds like there might have to be a little separate presentation on the opportunities and some assessment on Daryl's part on how it would fit into our grand scheme. But it seems foolhardy not to look into an opportunity like that. And
I'll just say that the reconciliation process, as it has evolved over the years, in the end, we feel like it's easy to say yes to a particular thing that we think we want to add or subtract if we talk about that in a vacuum, but we need to, in the end, have them kind of all on the table so we can say, okay, here's the big picture, here's all the pieces, what are the priorities, what do we want to do? So at this point, we're still putting things into that pot so that we can look at them all together. And from the city staff's point of view, being able to evaluate and put a dollar number to those so that we know what the impact is can take time, and the hardest part is when things get put in at the end and staff has to scramble to try and come up with that. So that's why one of the changes that we did this year was to put this discussion at the end of each of our budget discussions so we can have those things as they come up, have a little bit of the discussion, and give staff some indication of what we want to get for the end of the process.
I would certainly support putting this on the reconciliation list, but I would also suggest that it might require a more detailed discussion than some of the other items on the reconciliation list, and maybe we need a separate agenda item to learn more about this and what the, which program would be appropriate, if any, for the city, and what the cost would be associated with that.
And I would be supportive of trying to get our arms around this. And this came up at my last local government advisory committee meeting, so that Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay staff, I think, would be a good source for finding out exactly how this is working, because they've been coordinating with NIFWF and have a sense of how other communities around here, including Gaithersburg and Rockville, have used this particular funding mechanism. So people are generally in agreement that more information on this would be helpful?
Yes.
Okay.
And I assume the Councilmember Mayo will help to coordinate and get information.
Yeah, and just, whether it's helpful to have someone from the foundation come and speak to us, or I can obviously provide printed information about this, which is easy to do. What would be the easiest What's going to be the most helpful?
We'll figure
We'll figure
that
that
out
out.
and coordinate with you
Okay.
soon. Does the city manager need anything else for this evening?
Nope.
We've given you enough things to scribble down.
I have my list.
You have 6 minutes.
You mean the minus 54?
Okay. Thank you all. We're adjourned.
Then she'll run like a shiver from the land. She gives to me the gift of less to see. Night is a woman who embraces Night is a woman who embraces me.
Wandering in this wilderness, lost without a guide. Just an ordinary man trying to make it to the other side. Don't treat me like a leper, ease my weary load. A simple human touch, and I'll feel less alone. Lift me up, take my hand, all on that same journey. We're all crossing the Canaan land. Come on.